On demand.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 12th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver, and I'm here in North Devon at a family-run farm to find out what exactly people make of Labour's tax plans.
And you've even brought a dog with you. Fantastic stuff. Emily will be bringing us those perspectives throughout the show. But on other news, pressure is growing on the Archbishop of Canterbury to resign today, following the latest revelations in the John Smythe review, with the Bishop of Newcastle claiming his position is now untenable. Sir Keir Starmer is in Azerbaijan for the Global Climate Conference. Today he's committed the UK to harsher emissions targets, down by 81% as soon as 2035. Are you willing to stump up more cash for the climate? And Altrincham residents are furious as they learn hundreds of illegal migrants in their local hotels will receive private healthcare alongside their free accommodation, all courtesy, of course, of the taxpayer. Why are the people who come here illegally being given superior services than the rest of us? And it's a special show today, of course, because Emily Carver is down in Exmoor for us on a really rather miraculous farm. Where are you, Emily?
I am in North Devon, not far from Barnstable. I have a lovely dog here who's been helping us sheep herd today. I've been learning a bit more about life on a farm, but also I've been discussing the important things too, the impact that tax changes will have on your local family farm, on family businesses up and down the country, also on supply chains too, and crucially for our food security.
Absolutely cracking stuff. We'll be with you, of course, throughout the programme. Looking forward to learning much more about agricultural life. And, of course, do get in touch. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved throughout the programme. But for now, it's your news headlines with Lewis Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good afternoon. It's just after 12 o'clock. I'm Lewis Mackenzie here in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has pledged an 81% cut to the UK emissions by 2035 at the COP29 climate summit in Azerbaijan. Sir Keir Starmer says there is a huge opportunity for the UK to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow, which will mean better jobs and better economic growth in the UK. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say just moments ago.
Let me be clear. There is no national security, there is no economic security, there is no global security without climate security. And this is a huge opportunity for investment, for UK businesses, for British workers, if we act now to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow.
The PM has refused to give his backing to the Archbishop of Canterbury over his handling of child abuse claims. Sir Keir Starmer said it was a matter for the Church as pressure grows for Justin Welby to stand down. It comes after a damning report into the suspected abuse of over 100 children by a well-known barrister associated with the Church of England. The report also claims that the institution had played a role in covering up the accusations when details initially came to light in 2013. Terminally ill adults who are expected to die within 6 months would be able to request assistance to end their own life under the proposed end-of-life bill, but someone with a disability or mental health issues would not be eligible. The controversial bill has raised some concerns that people could feel pressured to end their life prematurely. Labour MP Kim Leadbeater, who put forward the bill, says it includes the strictest safeguards anywhere in the world. MPs will have their first vote on the proposals on the 29th of November. A once-a-day pill that could help tens of thousands of people give up cigarettes and prevent thousands of smoking-related deaths each year will be rolled out on the NHS. The pill works by tackling nicotine cravings and also helps with withdrawal symptoms such as irritability and trouble of sleeping. Official estimates say it could help more than 85,000 people give up smoking over the next 5 years, as well as preventing 9,500 smoking-related deaths. Wage growth has fallen to its lowest level in more than 2 years, while joblessness has jumped by more than expected. The Office for National Statistics says the average regular earnings growth eased by only 4.8% in the last 3 months up to September. That's down from 4.9% in the previous 3 months. This marked the lowest level since June of 2022. The ONS also says the rate of UK unemployment rose from 4% to 4.3% in the previous 3 months. Boris Johnson has told GB News that Sir Keir Starmer is not doing enough to stop foreign criminals in the UK. The former PM says it's time to review the ECHR and says the Rwanda plan would have worked. It comes as the number of migrants crossing the English Channel in small boats is likely to hit 40,000 by the end of the year, according to maritime security sources, as almost 33,000 have now made the illegal journey so far this year. A Home Office spokesman said, "We will stop at nothing to bring the people smuggling gangs to justice." Here's what the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson had to say on GB News last night.
And I really believe that would have been a huge deterrent to illegal migration. It would have been a huge deterrent. It might be time to review the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, because I think sometimes it is being applied in a way that is anti-democratic and that is stopping the removal of people who plainly need to be removed.
Queen Camilla will return to public duties today after her chest infection. The Queen is attending the Booker Prize reception at Clarence House today, but will meet guests for a shorter period than initially planned. She was forced to withdraw from her duties last week and missed the weekend's Remembrance Day commiserations events. And finally, Gary Lineker will step down as host of the Match of the Day at the end of the current season. The 63-year-old former England striker presented Match of the Day since 1999, which amounts to 26 years in the role. Lineker was the BBC's highest-paid on-air talent for 7 consecutive years. Mark Chapham, Gabby Logan and Alex Scott are the current front-runners to replace the former England star. Well, those have been your latest GB News headlines. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. There's more from me in half an hour's time.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past midday. Now, in our Farmageddon special, we're looking at the plight farmers face across the country following the government's changes to inheritance tax. In an interview with GB News last night, the former senior Labour advisor John McTernan had this to say about farmers.
Do to farmers what Margaret Thatcher did to miners, which was, and she used very heavy-handed police tactics, followed by what? Putting them out of business.
If people are so upset that they want to go on the streets and spray slurry on them, then we don't need the small farmers.
Well, our political editor, Christopher Hope, today asked the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, about those comments from that former senior Labour advisor.
Your inheritance tax plans for farmers. John McTernan, a former aide to Tony Blair, of course the Labour Prime Minister, says your party wants to do to the farmers what Thatcher did to the miners. It's an industry we can do without. Is that what you think about farming?
No, I totally disagree. I'm absolutely committed to supporting our farmers. I said that before the election and I say it after the election. That is why in our budget last week I was very pleased that we're investing £5 billion of our budget over the next 2 years into farming. That is really important for our farmers, and I will do everything I can to support them, because I think it's essential that they not only prosper, but prosper well into the future. So I totally disagree with those comments.
Well, those are the words of the Prime Minister just moments ago. Let's cross live now to GB News' very own Emily Carver, my wonderful co-host, who is at a farm on Exmoor in North Devon this afternoon. And Emily, you're looking marvellous on a hay bale.
Well, thank you very much. This is actually, yes, this is a hay bale. It's more of a straw bale, actually. But yes, welcome to Fernham Farm in North Devon. Now, this is James Wright's farm. Thank you very much for having us here. And also, we have Robin and we also have Ollie, who are also local farmers in the area. And they've come down to express their concerns about some of the changes that Labour are bringing in that will affect family farms and will affect many businesses around this area and across the country. Now, I will put to you, James, firstly, we just heard, we talked about this a little earlier, John McTernan, a senior advisor to Tony Blair back in the day. Now, he came out and he said on GB News last night that we can do without farms, that we should do what Thatcher did to the mines with the farming industry. We don't need small farms anymore. I mean, Starmer has been asked this question by our political editor. It's been put to him just now. Starmer has slapped it down. But do you believe that this government is doing their best for farmers?
I mean, no. I mean, clearly he said the quiet part out loud. I mean, this was their plan all along, although they made commitments before the election not to do exactly what they've done. They seem very happy to throw family farming to the wolves, and it feels very much like a war against the countryside, war against rural people, rather than sound governance.
Now, Robin, Keir Starmer has slapped down those comments from John McTernan, a former special advisor to Tony Blair. He said, no, we want to support farming. Do you believe him?
Currently, no. There's absolutely no indication whatsoever of them supporting farming at the moment, especially farming in the scale that we do in this kind of area. Those sort of family farms that rely on, well, understanding by government. And their current approach appears like it's incredibly vindictive towards the countryside, rather than taking opportunity that they had to reform taxation to the benefit of small business.
Ollie, would you agree with that it feels vindictive?
I don't think it's about raising tax. It's an all-out attack on family farms, and actually a lot of family farms are in quite a precarious position already, and all it's going to lead to is massive underinvestment for generations, which then means we're going to end up with farms that are less functional, less profitable, and it's awful.
Now, Robin, you've been in farming for quite a while. Remind me how long?
A long time.
A long time. OK, we won't put a specific number of years on that one.
I'm Generation 8 on my farm, all right?
And I understand that your children are already working the farm. They've taken over.
My son has taken over, and unfortunately the structure of the taxation means that I now have to rethink my entire succession approach. What was put in place using a tax system that was there now needs rethinking, with no certainty as to what it means, and very little understanding, evidently, from either the Chancellor of the Exchequer or the Farming Minister or the Treasury at the moment. It appears that they do not understand the rules they've put in place themselves, and they have not liaised with DEFRA to find out what the real situation in farming is.
And Ollie, do you think there will be lots of young farmers who've been working their family land for a number of years who might actually rethink things, might actually decide to do something else, sell up and do something else?
Yeah, 100%, because you can go and get a job, a lot of people can go and get a job in the city or in other industries, have stable incomes, where suddenly, you're looking at potentially inheriting a farm that then you could end up with a £40,000-50,000 a year tax bill for 10 years. A lot of these businesses were barely making, that to start with. So then you end up back at zero, and where do you go?
And James, just on that point, I mean, the government they'd say we're only targeting the very wealthiest farmers, only the very biggest, most profitable farms. This isn't going to impact the average family farm. We need to fill this black hole. We don't have enough money coming into the coffers. It's time that farmers paid their way. What would you say?
Well, it's just like Ollie and Robin have said, is that that's not true. They've done the sums wrong. They think £1 million is a large farm. It's not. This is a 160-acre farm. We're well below the size of average, but well above the threshold in which we'll pay tax. And simply, as long as I live, we will not earn enough from this farm to pay that death duty. And what's worse is that you can put in a plan in place to avoid the tax over a very long period of time, but this will become a family tragedy tax. You'll have someone like Ollie and I in our early 30s who all of a sudden dies in 40s, and young children, the family will have to sell the farm. This is not about protecting the countryside, not about building a better Britain. This is a war on rural people.
And that's the point, really, why we're here, to find out the human stories behind the headlines. A lot of people, particularly people living in cities who don't have a clue about farming, I would say myself included, but of course I like listening to people around the country who know more about these things than I do, or some of our viewers might know, to try to find actually how this will impact people on the ground and what perhaps the Labour government are choosing to ignore on this one. Just a quick yes or no. Ollie, will you be attending one of the protests that are planned?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm there next Tuesday.
Oh, well, there you go. It's 3 for 3. All three of these farmers, Ollie, Robin and James, will be heading down to protest the government's plans when it comes to inheritance tax and everything else. Back to you, Tom.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for that. It's going to be a very, very interesting time when we see, well, thousands of farmers descend on Westminster. But thanks to Emily, thanks to Robin, thanks to Ollie and thanks to James. Joining me now in the studio is political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Matthew, this is a real difficult area for the Labour Party. It's one of these groups that you really don't want to upset, a very sympathetic group.
Well, it's being whipped up, isn't it? I mean, GBNews, some presenters, some commentators, some of the tabloids absolutely revelling in this opportunity to stick it to the government.
Well, farmers themselves.
Indeed, some farmers, but no one ideally, well, very few people want to pay more tax. So, of course, they're going to be angry and their voices are being amplified. I think it was Ollie, one of the farmers there, who was talking about you can avoid this, but over a very long period of time. Like with any inheritance tax, and don't forget, people are paying inheritance tax up and down the country. There was this loophole for farmers, but you can avoid that with the 7-year rule, and that's tapered down. So, yes, this would impact someone if they were to die in the next few years, and there will be an effect. But for the vast majority of farmers, you would think that if they want to rearrange their affairs, they can still pass their farms down free of inheritance tax. There's another point to make, that you can still avoid, without the 7-year rule, you can still avoid inheritance tax on £2 million, even £3 million, if it's split between a husband and wife and so forth, and then passed down, and if there's a home involved as well. What this, I hope, was designed to do by the government was to close the loophole for the very wealthy and the super wealthy who were investing in land, perhaps in part precisely to avoid inheritance tax. And we, the taxpayers and the users of public services, were consequently losing out. Let me give you an example. James Dyson, Sir James Dyson, the entrepreneur, the guy who sort of makes the Hoovers.
Yes.
He is supposed to own, as far as we know, reputedly, something like 36,000 acres. Just imagine the amount of inheritance tax that before this comes in, he could have avoided. That is money that is desperately needed by GBNews viewers who might be on waiting lists on the NHS. One more example.
Matthew, isn't this the same argument as the winter fuel payment withdrawal? You can make the argument that Sir Alan Sugar should not receive the winter fuel payment. That's very easy to make. I think most people in the country would completely agree with you. You can make the argument that Sir James Dyson should pay inheritance tax on the land he owns. Absolutely, I think most people would agree with you. The problem is, when we look at the farmers like we've been talking to today, the problem is when you look at the marginal cases, the people who don't have spare cash, and farmers tend to be asset-rich because of all of the land and cash-poor. They can't pay it.
This affects the majority of the people who are impacted by this, or who would have been impacted in the past had this been in existence in the past, would have been the wealthier farmers, the wealthier landowners. Of course, there may be people who I don't think any of us would want to be hit by it. And there is absolutely an argument that the government could have put the threshold higher to make sure that those farmers were protected. But against that, we are facing a crisis in public services. Tax needs to come from somewhere. And if you look at someone like Jeremy Clarkson, this is a man who said, I believe, to the Times in 2021 that the critical reason in buying his farm worth over £4 million, either at the time or now, was to avoid inheritance tax. He is one of the people who is whipping this up. I was brought up going to the Welsh countryside for something like 15, 16 weeks a year on our holidays. We took many, many of our holidays domestically. In the beauty of the Welsh hills, we became integrated in our local community. I was surrounded by farmers. I have nothing but respect for what these guys do, and their families, the wives, the farmers and everyone else. They work sometimes 365 days a year. They will be bringing their tractors back in August at 10 o'clock at night. These people are amongst the hardest, if not the hardest, workers in this country. And I would therefore like to distance myself very strongly from what another commentator said on this channel yesterday, John McTiernan. I think something to the extent of we can do without farmers. I'm paraphrasing.
Family farmers, small farmers.
Small farmers, and we could do to them what Thatcher did to the coal miners. I don't for a second think that either Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer identifies with that. And in fact, we've heard from the Prime Minister that he doesn't.
Isn't the issue that both Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, urban MPs, city MPs, most of the Labour leadership come from very small... A lot of the senior cabinet figures come from, frankly, one small part of London. Isn't the issue that people at home think that actually what John McTiernan said last night is exactly what these people think? Well, they don't understand the countryside and that they would be happy to see thousands of small farms go out of business.
Well, I'm here to say that you don't have to live in the countryside to have proper advisors who can let you know jolly well what the issues are. And if Reeves has not been properly advised, that would be very bad indeed. But I'm not sure that we've got the evidence for that. One other very quick thing, and that is, very briefly, one of the advantages of this policy is that it may deflate the value of land and allow newcomers to get into farming, because one disadvantage, one downside of family farms is it's kind of stitched up, whereas now people who are desperate to get into farming but can't afford it may be better placed to do so.
That's one argument, although, of course, it could be the large mega farms that buy up the land. Matthew Stadland, thank you so much for coming in and putting across your perspective. Plenty more, of course, to come on this programme. Up next, we'll have the very latest on the Archbishop of Canterbury. Might he resign this very afternoon, following more revelations about the Church's abuse scandal?
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
But it turns out there's a growing number of grandparents who are now taking up the hobby.
And not all of them are male. 7 million gamers are aged over 50, 7 million of them. And we're going to introduce you to one this morning. Her name's Kath Bowie. She's 76 years of age, and Kath has become a worldwide star of the game Fortnite. Good to see you, Kath.
Hello, good morning to both of you.
And tell me this, Kath, is Bowie your real name?
Bowie. Yeah.
Bowie.
Yes, it is my real name, yes.
And you do it a Bowie and not a Bowie?
It's a Bowie, yes, definitely Bowie, yes.
Bowie or Bowie?
Bowie.
Bowie.
But that's not what the Jim Bowie was called, or Jim Bowie was called in the Alamo. He was a Bowie.
No, but that's what I'm called, Kath Bowie.
Oh, right.
She's their own superstar.
You are your own superstar. You are indeed. Well, so we're led to believe, Kath, that there's nobody else like you, or very few people like you, but there is. There is lots of people your age, your stage, doing what you do.
Yes, there's not a lot that streams. Okay, Fortnite, but there's definitely plenty that plays. Any game, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be Fortnite. It can be any game.
So Kath, how did you get started in all of this?
Oh, yeah, well, it's 7 years ago, actually. I walked into my teenage grandson's bedroom and just saw him playing what I now know, of course, and what I play is Fortnite. And that was the very first week that Epic had released it. And it was just really love at first sight.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past midday, and is Justin Welby's position now untenable? The Archbishop of Canterbury is facing increased pressure to stand down over his handling of a child abuse scandal, which an independent report into the matter described as a cover-up. The report exposed his failure to act on allegations involving the barrister John Smythe, who was one of the Church's most prolific abusers through the 1970s and 1980s. So let's head to Lambeth Palace now and speak to GB News correspondent Olivia Utley. Olivia, this is really touch and go now for the Archbishop.
Yes, it does feel as though he's clinging on by the tips of his fingers. Last week, Justin Welby said that he had seriously considered resigning over the matter, but had decided not to. Now, though, that position is looking much more shaky. A number of Smythe's victims and 3 senior members of the Church of England clergy and the Bishop of Newcastle have all said that Justin Welby should resign. To make matters worse, it now looks as though Parliament is turning against the Archbishop of Canterbury too. Last night, Keir Starmer gave a bit of a waffly statement where he didn't come down clearly on either side. This morning, he has very much toughened up that position. He still says that it is a matter for the Church of England to decide whether Welby should resign, but he says that he doesn't want to shy away from how horrific these allegations are. Meanwhile, Nick Timothy, a new Conservative MP, has tabled an urgent question in the House of Commons. He's also written a column in The Telegraph saying that Justin Welby should resign. So it really does feel now as though it's touch and go. The Archbishop of Canterbury has cleared his diary for this morning, and as you might be able to see, I am not the only reporter standing outside Lambeth Palace now.
Well, Olivia, we'll be back to you, of course, throughout the programme as this story develops. For now, thank you very much indeed. Let's speak now to a sexual abuse survivor, the Reverend Matthew Innocen. Matthew, thank you so much for making the time for us this afternoon. I mean, I know that your case doesn't involve the particular cleric in the Welby scandal, but it does speak to the wider issues in the church. This must be a very difficult day for you to sort of speak about your own experiences.
Thank you very much for inviting me on. Very, very grateful. And I'd like to begin by saying I stand with my brother victims of Smythe. I'm not a victim of Smythe, but you know what they have gone through and must be feeling at this time must be tremendous. So I just want to pay testimony to them for their great courage and also recognise what they have been through. This is a very difficult time. Justin Welby, in my opinion, yes, he should go. Who has he got the confidence of anymore? Nobody. The question has to be raised. Are people safe in the church today? I would say you cannot 100% say that. Even today, Justin Welby is sort of fighting this resignation, and he needs to go.
It is a weighty topic to discuss, and I just think how many times, how many scandals, not just in the Church of England, frankly across many different churches, this seems to be something that keeps coming back. Why do you think more wasn't done when Mr. Welby learned, or at least says he learned first of these allegations in 2013?
Well, there does seem to be some discrepancy about when he did actually know. Initially said he knew in 2017 it was the first time he'd heard. Then he said it was in 2013, we've heard now. The actual review that was published by the Church of England said it is unlikely that he did not know back in the 1980s. You know, when did he know? The story seems to change all the time. It does seem to affect institutions and particularly churches, doesn't it? Right across the world, this child sex abuse. Why? I suspect the churches have always been held in high esteem and they rely on that, they carry that, they don't deserve it, and they are determined, the leaders of the church, including Justin Welby, are determined to protect their institution and their position at all costs, above anybody. And that is the problem. Can I, if I would just add here, this is true of Justin Welby, but it's also true of all the other bishops and the other churches. You know, if they had acted sooner, they could have prevented abuse. If Justin Welby had acted when he knew, even if we take it was in 2013, those who were abused by John Smythe afterwards would not have been abused. It could have been brought to book earlier. So there is negligence here.
That is a really powerful point to make. I suppose the other point here is what you also brought up, the sort of impetus, the incentive for all of these institutions to sort of crowd in, prevent sunlight getting in, sort of protect their own and try and make sure that scandals are swept under the carpet. I mean, how does the culture in these institutions begin to change?
How did that culture come about in the first place? It begins to change today where you have to have a complete, you know, Welby needs to go, all those involved need to go, the bishops. There has to be a complete start again. And the church has to say it will hand over its safeguarding to an independent body. There must be mandatory reporting in the church. There must be. And all institutions. The church has got itself into this mess, and yes, it does protect its reputation. But what reputation does the church have anymore when it comes to safeguarding and the protecting anybody from abuse? It still goes on today, and it always will, while the likes of Justin Welby are in power, because he's had 10 years and nothing has changed. In my own case, I disclosed 8 times to 5 bishops. There ended up being 13 complaints sent to Justin Welby about bishops ignoring my disclosures of abuse. And they left my abuser 5 years to carry on abusing. He was eventually charged. But they could have acted sooner and prevented anybody else being abused. They didn't. When the complaints were filed with Justin Welby, on each and every occasion, he took no further action. Yeah, he was protecting his own then. I believe what's happened over the past few days with Justin Welby, and it does apply to all the institutions, the churches, but what's happened over the past few days, the past 2 or 3 days, is that this is the straw that breaks the camel back. Welby himself has been caught out here. That's the problem.
It is a point you put across so very powerfully. Reverend Matthew Innocent, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on Good Afternoon Britain. Really appreciate your time and your bravery, quite frankly.
Thank you.
Well, in response to the allegations, the Archbishop of Canterbury has said this in a statement. I recognise the courage of those victims, including those related to John Smythe, who have come forward and relived their trauma through contributing to this review. I had no idea or suspicion of this abuse before 2013. Nevertheless, the review is clear that I personally failed to ensure that after disclosure in 2013, the awful tragedy was energetically investigated. Since that time, the way in which the Church of England engages with victims and survivors has changed beyond recognition. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and your latest headlines are up next with Lewis Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good afternoon. It's just after 12:30, and here are your latest GB News headlines. The Prime Minister has pledged an 81% cut to UK emissions by 2035 at the COP29 Climate Summit in Azerbaijan. Sir Keir Starmer says there is a huge opportunity for the UK to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow, which will mean better jobs and economic growth in the UK. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say just in the last hour.
Let me be clear. There is no national security. There is no economic security. There is no global security without climate security. And this is a huge opportunity for investment, for UK businesses, for British workers, if we act now to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow.
The PM has refused to give his backing to the Archbishop of Canterbury over his handling of child abuse claims. Sir Keir Starmer said it was a matter for the Church as pressure grows for Justin Welby to stand down. It comes after a damning report into the suspected abuse of over 100 children by a well-known barrister associated with the Church of England. The report also claims that the institution had played a role in covering up the accusations when the details initially came to light in 2013. A once-a-day pill that could help tens of thousands of people give up cigarettes and prevent thousands of smoking-related deaths each year will be rolled out on the NHS. The pill works by tackling nicotine cravings and also helps with withdrawal symptoms, but such as irritability and trouble sleeping. Official estimates say it could help more than 85,000 people a year give up smoking over the next 5 years, as well as prevent up to 9,500 smoking-related deaths. And finally, Gary Lineker will step down as the host of Match of the Day at the end of the current season. The 63-year-old former England striker presented Match of the Day since 1999, which amounts to almost 26 years in the role. Lineker was the BBC's highest-paid on-air talent for 7 consecutive years. Mark Chapham, Gabby Logan and Alex Scott are the current front-runners to replace the former England star. Well, those have been your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. There's more from me in half an hour's time.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another fine day for most of us with sunny spells, although there will be some stubborn fog patches slow to clear into the afternoon, and 1 or 2 spots could get a few showers, most notably the east and southeast of England, with a northeasterly breeze picking up some moisture from the North Sea. Otherwise, high pressure is firmly in control of the weather, and with light winds and clear skies overnight, we have seen some fog this morning in some spots. Northern Ireland, for example, parts of central Scotland, that fog may last until the afternoon. For many other places, though, it's a dry and bright day. Some patchy cloud coming into the Midlands, eastern and southeastern England, 1 or 2 showers. Otherwise, dry and feeling pleasant enough with light winds towards the north and the west and some sunshine. But temperatures are going to fall away quickly into the evening under those clear skies, and it's going to be another chilly night. And nevertheless, plenty of fine weather to end the day. That fog reforming very quickly, and in some places where it hasn't cleared, it's just going to continue into the evening across Northern Ireland and central parts of Scotland. Meanwhile, the northwest of Scotland will see a thickening of the cloud and some patchy drizzle arrive overnight, a freshening breeze as well. A weakening weather front is going to sink south into northwest Scotland. That, of course, means it's going to be a much milder night for northern and western Scotland. Northern Ireland, likewise, will see the cloud increase overnight, perhaps clearing the fog by dawn. But it's across central parts of the UK where we'll see the clearest skies and the coldest air first thing, some fog patches, a touch of frost in places. The far south and southeast, enough of a breeze, and those showers continuing means that it won't be a frosty or foggy start here. But 1 or 2 further showers are likely across parts of Kent. Meanwhile, the cloud and drizzly outbreaks of rain sink south across Scotland and Northern Ireland through the day. And it's a milder day across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it's colder further south.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, hello again to you. I'm Jules Buckley. If you're heading towards Glasgow, there's some queues for the eastbound M8, particularly just away from Glasgow Airport, 28 towards Paisley at 27. Until about 11:15, there was a lane blocked there by a breakdown. That's cleared, but we're still seeing some big queues. Very slow for the M5 southbound, still closed in Somerset from junction 24 to 25. That's Bridgewater South down towards Taunton. Big queues for investigation work. The A38, big diversion, that's queuing, as is the A39 as well. Now, 2 lanes shut and a 4-mile queue on the anti-clock M25 at junction 27. Takes about 20 minutes to get through the scene of a broken down lorry. And Devises in Wiltshire, Northgate Street, the A360, shut between New Park Street and Castle Lane and queuing. There's a building fire causing delays.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 39 minutes past midday. Now, hold on to your hats, because according to a new book, Vladimir Putin came so close to launching a nuclear missile against Ukraine that crisis meetings were held about nuclear fallout hitting Britain. Yes, the former Prime Minister Liz Truss is also meant to have spent her final days in office studying weather maps and preparing for UK radiation cases. This after American spies raised fears the Russian president was just hours away from pressing that nuclear button. But just how credible are these reports? To answer that question, I'm delighted to be joined by the defence analyst and former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Stuart, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, this is hugely concerning, reading about it in the papers this morning. Apparently a 50-50 chance that nuclear weapons could have been used.
Good afternoon, Tom. Yes, indeed, it is concerning. The good news is, I suppose, that it didn't happen. But I think that given the state of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine in October 22, round about when this sort of thing was happening, and the fact that the Ukrainians had just launched a very successful counter-offensive north of Kharkiv, which took back considerable piece of territory that the Russians had captured, then I think that clearly Putin and his acolytes were reviewing all the options, and a tactical nuclear weapon in terms of modern warfare is one of the options. Thankfully, they didn't follow it.
Does it sound credible to you that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom could really have been sitting in her office at that time consulting weather maps of nuclear fallout? I mean, it sounds like the sort of thing that comes from science fiction or some sort of disaster movie.
I think it's very credible. You can't compare the two directly because there are all sorts of different parameters involved. But if you look at the nuclear fallout from the Chernobyl nuclear power facility in Ukraine in 1986, you will find that in the long term, some of the radioactivity from that ended up in Canada. And you will remember, I suspect, that for a considerable period of time, some of our farm products like Welsh lamb and so on were off the menu because of the high levels of radioactive active particles that they had consumed. So it's hardly fantastic that Liz Truss was looking at these mats with some concern because it's all weather dependent. And if you look at where the prevailing wind in Ukraine blows, it is from the southeast to the northwest. And that would put us more or less in the path of at least some of it.
I mean, it does just boggle the mind. These were the sorts of conversations that I gather were much more readily being had in the 1960s and perhaps 1980s. The stories of painting curtains with I don't know what and sort of making sure you've got tinned food in the cupboard. So we're going to have to start going through that sort of public information nonsense again.
Well, it wouldn't do any harm. We're talking about being closer to war nowadays than we have been for a long time. And I think that everybody's beginning to think again about civilian resilience and national resilience to any sort of disaster of that sort that comes along. And I well remember the instructions that we got. The one that always sticks with me was that if your grandmother died, you were to put her in a plastic bag and put her outside the door. So these things are not absolutely fantastic. I'm very hopeful, though, that wiser heads usually prevail and will not be facing that sort of thing. But your defence is an insurance policy. We have to be prepared to defend ourselves against these risks. We hope that we don't have to use our defence resources, but it's much cheaper and easier to prepare in peacetime than it is to catch up during wartime.
Well, I suppose we can all be thankful that no nuclear weapon has been used in Ukraine, that Vladimir Putin hasn't hit that big red button. But of course, he's increasingly close to one man who has been doing more and more intercontinental missile tests. And that is Kim Jong-un, who, from North Korea just a few weeks ago, tested a very long-range missile that was capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Is this a man who is perhaps even less stable than Vladimir Putin?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that we're talking really about sort of rogue states led by rogue leaders. And North Korea has indeed got a nuclear... There are 9 countries in the world which have nuclear weapons at the moment that we know about, and North Korea is one of them. But I think the Americans have got a pretty good handle on where North Korea is in its weapons program. And a bit like the Israelis with Iran, there are limits beyond which they will not allow them to progress. So I am relatively optimistic that we won't see nuclear weapons being used in the foreseeable future.
Well, on that bright and happy note, thanks so much for joining us, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, former British Army officer, of course. Well, goodness me, much more to come on today's programme. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We're going to take next a look into why Gary Lineker has chosen to finally leave the BBC.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
3 incredible young people from Essex are planning to become the youngest people ever to row, not sail, row, across the Atlantic Ocean.
It's about for 3,000 miles.
It is.
Give or take.
Almost exactly that, Sam.
The 3 flying fish, so-called, consists of Anna, Dunk, Harry, Alan and Rowan Daly, who are preparing to row that 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. It would be the 2nd largest ocean in the world. And the trio are aiming to do that challenge in support of the Teenage Cancer Trust.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that Anna and Harry from the Flying Fish join us now. Very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
I think the 2 of you are bonkers, but brilliant. Absolutely incredible what you're doing to raise money for Teenage Cancer Trust. Why did you want to do this?
So our third person, Rowan, his friend actually died. So when he was in secondary school, I believe, one of his peers passed away, and Teenage Cancer Trust supported them and their family a lot. So it was definitely the right charity. Yeah, it was.
Absolutely awful. So you wanted to do something to raise money for teenage cancer. Why rowing?
So my dad did it in 2021.
The trip, the Atlantic trip?
Yeah, he rode it as a pair. Where we live in Essex, they actually build the boats there. So we used to cycle round there past the boatyard, and he got interested and actually did it. He was the first year after COVID. And one night, we all met in the Air Cadets, so one night after Air Cadets, Rowan actually dropped me off home and the boat was outside. We were obviously waiting to get it sold. And I think he was asking some questions and we stood there at my porch and Rowan said, I reckon we could do that. And I was like, yeah, I reckon we could. And then we brought Harry on board, and that's kind of how it all came together.
If people are watching and they want to support you, do you have a
Yeah, we've got
GoFundMe page
social
yet?
media platforms at
Right.
The Free Flying Fish. That's Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, and our GoFundMe links in all of the bios on there.
Fantastic.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 10 to 1. Now, after 26 years, yes, 26 years presenting Match of the Day, Gary Lineker will quit the show at the end of this season. Reports have also claimed that his possible replacements have already been written up by top BBC sport officials, with Mark Chapman and Alex Scott being currently considered. But joining me to discuss this perhaps somewhat expected move is the sports journalist Ben Jacobs. Ben, thanks so much for making the time. Gary Lineker had been reportedly umming and ahhing about whether or not to leave this top spot on Match of the Day. Why do you think he's done so now?
Yeah, by all accounts, he was open to continuing, so it's very much amicable, but a two-way decision that will see Gary Lineker finish at Match of the Day at the end of the season, as you say, then continue hosting the FA Cup and also fronting the BBC's coverage of the 2026 World Cup, plus his podcast, which is called The Rest is Football, will be aired on BBC platforms. So there will still be an affiliation between Lineker and the BBC. But I think it's a bit of a changing of the guard. As you say, it will be 26 years by the time he's done with Match of the Day. He's in his mid-60s. There's a new sports director at the BBC with different ideas. There's the cost issue, and the BBC probably looking to replace Gary Lineker with somebody on less than his 1.3 million salary. So it's a variety of things. But I think when Lineker got the BBC feedback, thought about his own career and its progression, he probably in the end decided it was better to leave Match of the Day on his own terms. And as a sports presenter, he's outstanding, world class, and will be sorely missed and difficult to replace.
Yes, I mean, he clearly is at the absolute top of his game when it comes to sports presenting. I think what a lot of people, perhaps watching this programme, might have felt is that he was also a sort of wannabe political commentator at the same time, and that didn't quite mesh always with the idea of BBC neutrality.
As you say, there was the incident in particular where Gary Lineker spoke on his personal platforms about the UK's asylum policy, and it resulted in a brief suspension from Match of the Day, and then the parties were able to come to a resolution. I'm not sure we can directly link this exit with that particular incident because it was last year, and Lineker will still be affiliated to the BBC and on the BBC until that World Cup in 2026. But what we probably can say is, from Lineker's point of view, by being a freelancer and leaving Match of the Day, he might have more freedom to take other opinions and even maybe move his career in different directions as well. So it might end up suiting Lineker to not have that week by week Match of the Day type affiliation with the BBC because he'll now have the freedom. But that incident just really highlighted the fact that there's a grey line between someone who is Mr. BBC, represents the BBC, but is freelance and has his personal platforms as well. And it led to a very healthy and productive debate, and maybe made Lineker think about where he wanted to be and how he could best use his voice. But I don't think the Match of the Day exit is directly related to that incident last year.
Yes, although, as you say, now he looks less like a BBC employee and more like someone who occasionally pops up on the BBC, perhaps a much more amicable and relaxing sort of relationship there, his views not being ascribed to the BBC anymore. I suppose the other half of this is he's got an immensely successful podcast empire that seems to occupy the number 1, 2 and 3 spots in terms of the podcast league tables in the UK. I mean, surely he must be raking it in from that. So perhaps his 1.3 million from the BBC licence fee looks like chicken feed in comparison.
Yeah, I'm not aware of the exact finances from that business, but as you say, it's thriving. And one of those podcasts, The Rest is Football, will end up on the BBC platforms, again, still creating that affiliation. But what we see from Lineker is he's not just an outstanding presenter and was a world-class footballer, but he's a businessman, he's a producer, and we might see him go into other areas as well, because he'll have a little bit more free time.
We've only got a minute left, so I'm just going to interrupt you quickly. Who do you think might be replacing Gary Lineker on Match of the Day?
I think you mentioned two of the names, Mark Chapman, another outstanding presenter, Alex Scott. I think Lineker said on his podcast that Micah Richards could be a left field choice that he would endorse as well. So from those three, I think we might see the next presenter. And then, of course, due to his own scandal, Jermaine Genius, who was perhaps lined up to replace Lineker, will not be in the running because the BBC have ended their association with him.
Well, it'll be absolutely fascinating to see who steps into those shoes, but also perhaps fascinating for the sort of accountants to look at just how much it might cost. Maybe a big saving there for the BBC. But Ben Jacobs, sports journalist, thank you so much for joining us and talking through that interesting personnel changing of the guard there at the BBC. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and there's plenty more coming up on today's programme, so don't go anywhere. I do want to mention we're going to be talking to a local councillor up in Altrincham who organised a public meeting after asylum seekers were plonked in a hotel, 300 asylum seekers, and it seems that they may be getting now private health care for free. We'll take a look at that later in the programme. Here's the weather.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another fine day for most of us with sunny spells, although there will be some stubborn fog patches, slow to clear into the afternoon, and 1 or 2 spots could get a few showers, most notably the east and southeast of England, with a northeasterly breeze picking up some moisture from the North Sea. Otherwise, high pressure is firmly in control of the weather, and with light winds and clear skies overnight, we have seen some fog this morning in some spots. Northern Ireland, for example, parts of central Scotland, that fog may last until the afternoon. For many other places, though, it's a dry and bright day, some patchy cloud coming into the Midlands, eastern and southeastern England, 1 or 2 showers. Otherwise, dry and feeling pleasant enough with light winds towards the north and the west and some sunshine, but temperatures are going to fall away quickly into the evening under those clear skies, and it's going to be another chilly night. And nevertheless, plenty of fine weather to end the day. That fog reforming very quickly, and in some places where it hasn't cleared, it's just going to continue into the evening across Northern Ireland and central parts of Scotland. Meanwhile, the northwest of Scotland will see a thickening of the cloud and some patchy drizzle arrive overnight, a freshening breeze as well. A weakening weather front is going to sink south into northwest Scotland. That, of course, means it's going to be a much milder night for northern and western Scotland. Northern Ireland, likewise, will see the cloud increase overnight, perhaps clearing the fog by dawn. But it's across central parts of the UK where we'll see the clearest skies and the coldest air first thing, some fog patches, a touch of frost in places. The far south and southeast, enough of a breeze, and those showers continuing means that it won't be a frosty or foggy start here. But 1 or 2 further showers are likely across parts of Kent. Meanwhile, the cloud and drizzly outbreaks of rain sink south across Scotland and Northern Ireland through the day. And it's a milder day across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it's colder further south.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of...
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This week is Chocolate Week, the ultimate celebration of everything rich, sweet and indulgent.
Yes, and we now have the best person in the studio with us to satisfy all of your chocolate cravings. We're joined now by master chocolatier Ollie the Choc. Ollie,
hello.
Really
Hey,
good to see you this
Thank
morning.
you for having me.
And you brought some of your chocolate in with you.
I did. I brought some tasting samples. You're very welcome to help yourself.
So what have you got here? Tell us.
So this is my signature chocolate. I call it the Holy Grail. It's got sea salt flakes, crushed Oreo, caramel fudge pieces, very Moorish.
I love a caramel and salt combo, just, you know. I feel like you see it everywhere now. Look,
You won't be disappointed.
Look, I want everyone to see a close-up of this one. Can we get a shot on this one? So this is Oreo, there we are, caramel and salt. Do you want to try some?
You go first. Help yourselves. And then this bar of chocolate is a little bit of a wild card. That's a mystery flavour, so...
OK, I love a mystery.
I'm not going to tell you what that is.
Hold on this one. This one's amazing.
Are you?
Oreo, caramel.
That's my biggest seller.
I'll keep my palate clean for this. So this is a mystery flavour.
You've got to guess what that is.
Is that a nut in there, I see? Right, here we go. Ready?
I'm not saying anything.
Talk us through.
Very crunchy.
For me, I'm all about textures in chocolate.
Me too.
It has got a good crunch to it, hasn't it? It's not the kind of flavour that you would expect.
Oh, I can't get it.
Is it sweet? Is it salty?
No, it's salty, yeah.
It's
OK,
salty.
hang on, bit more.
OK.
Bit more.
I mean, just keep going.
Crisps? Wait,
It is crispy, it's crunchy. Could it be crisps?
I think it could be crisps. Yeah, it's crisps.
So what flavour?
Salt and vinegar. Cheese and onion.
Yes,
Salt
nailed
and
it. You know.
Oh, you're much better than me.
Love that.
Do you know what? I think I've got a bit of a cold, so my taste buds are
Oh,
off.
you're going to blame that, are you?
That's my excuse. That's delicious.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 12th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver, and I'm here in North Devon at a family-run farm to find out exactly what they think about Labour's plans.
And I'm looking forward to see what you get up to with those cows behind you. Emily will, of course, be bringing us more perspectives throughout the programme. Elsewhere, pressure is building on the Archbishop of Canterbury to resign today following the latest revelations in the John Smythe review, with the Bishop of Newcastle now claiming his position is untenable. And Sir Keir Starmer is in Azerbaijan for the Global Climate Conference. Today, he's committed the UK to even harsher emissions targets as soon as 2035. Are you willing to stump up the cash for the climate? And Altrincham residents are furious as they learn hundreds of illegal migrants in their local hotels will receive private healthcare alongside their free accommodation, all courtesy of the taxpayer. Why are people who come here illegally being given superior services than the rest of us? And of course, throughout, Emily Carver is on the farm. Emily.
I am indeed, and just at that moment that you came to me, a lovely heifer, a pregnant cow, just had a nice long wee right behind me. But that's OK, it's not on me, so that's all good. Yes, I am in a farm in North Devon, and I've been chatting to farmers down here, and there are real worries, real concerns about what these tax changes might mean for future generations. Will people have to sell up and leave, and will these farms continue to farm into the future? That's the issue. But we're going to be constructive this hour. These farmers that I'm meeting with today, they have real ideas on how Labour can improve their policy, how they can tax in a fairer way. We're going to come up with some solutions for you.
Well, that's what we like to hear, and I hope you're dry, despite having to lean on that fence where those heifers are getting a bit splashy. But we'll be with you, of course, after the news headlines. But please do get in touch as well. gbnews.com/yoursay is the way to get involved throughout the programme. But as I say, let's get those latest headlines now with Lewis Mackenzie.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Good afternoon. It's just after 1 o'clock. I'm Lewis Mackenzie here in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has pledged an 81% cut to UK emissions by 2035 at the UN Climate Summit in Azerbaijan. Sir Keir Starmer says there is a huge opportunity for the UK to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow, which will mean better jobs and economic growth in the UK. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say earlier on today.
Let me be clear. There is no national security. There is no economic security. There is no global security without climate security. And this is a huge opportunity for investment, for UK businesses, for British workers, if we act now to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow.
The PM has refused to give his backing to the Archbishop of Canterbury over his handling of child abuse claims. Sir Keir Starmer said it was a matter for the Church as pressure grows on Justin Welby to stand down. It comes after a damning report into the suspected abuse of over 100 children by a well-known barrister associated with the Church of England. The report also claims that the institution had played a role in the covering up of the accusations when details initially came to light in 2013. Terminally ill adults who are expected to die within 6 months would be able to request assistance to end their own life under the proposed end-of-life bill. But someone with a disability or mental health issues will not be eligible. The controversial bill has raised some concerns that people could feel pressured into ending their lives prematurely. Labour MP Kim Leadbeater, who put forward the bill, says it includes the strictest safeguards anywhere in the world. MPs will have their first vote on the proposals on the 29th of November. A once-a-day pill could help tens of thousands of people give up cigarettes and prevent thousands of smoking-related deaths each year. It will be rolled out on the NHS. The pill works by tackling nicotine cravings, and also helping with withdrawal symptoms such as irritability and trouble sleeping. Official estimates say it could potentially help up to 85,000 people giving up smoking over the next 5 years, as well as prevent up to 9,500 smoking-related deaths. Wage growth has fallen to its lowest level in more than 2 years, while joblessness has jumped by more than expected. The Office for National Statistics says the average regular earnings growth eased back to only 4.8% in the 3 months to September. That's down from 4.9% in the previous 3 months. This marks the lowest level since June of 2022. The ONS also says that the rate of UK unemployment has risen from 4% to 4.3% in the previous 3 months. Queen Camilla will return to public duties today after her chest infection. The Queen is attending the Booker Prize reception at Clarence House today, but will meet guests for a shorter period than initially planned. And finally, Gary Lineker will step down as host of Match of the Day at the end of the current season. The 63-year-old former England striker has presented Match of the Day since 1999, which amounts to almost 26 years in the role. Lineker was the BBC's highest-paid on-air talent for 7 consecutive years. Mark Chapham, Gabby Logan and Alex Scott are the current front-runners to replace the former England star. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. There's more from me in half an hour's time.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 6 minutes past 1, and this is our Farmageddon special. Yes, we're looking at the plight farmers across the country are facing following the government's changes to inheritance tax. In an interview with GB News last night, the former Labour advisor John McTernan had this to say about farmers.
Do to farmers what Margaret Thatcher did to miners, which was, and she used very heavy-handed police tactics, followed by what? Putting them out of business.
If people are so upset that they want to go on the streets and spray slurry on them, then we don't need the small farmers.
Well, let's zoom across to Azerbaijan, where our political editor, Christopher Hope, spoke to the Prime Minister, asked him about those very comments.
Tax plans for farmers. John McTernan, a former aide to Tony Blair, of course the Labour Prime Minister, says your party wants to do to the farmers what Thatcher did to the miners. It's an industry we can do without. Is that what you think about farming?
No, I totally disagree. I'm absolutely committed to supporting our farmers. I said that before the election and I say it after the election. That is why in our budget last week I was very pleased that we're investing £5 billion of our budget over the next 2 years into farming. That is really important for our farmers, and I will do everything I can to support them, because I think it's essential that they not only prosper, but prosper well into the future. So I totally disagree with those comments.
Well, let's cross from Azerbaijan down to Exmoor, where GB News' Emily Carver is at a farm in North Devon this afternoon. Emily, you're back on your hay bale.
That's the best person to ask.
I am back on my hay bale, my straw bale. And yes, last time I rudely didn't introduce Tess, or Tessa. Is it Tess or Tessa? Tess, the family dog who does a lot of work around here. But I've also got with me Ollie, who is a local farmer. We've got Robin as well, and of course James, who owns this specific farm in North Devon. Now, yes, those comments from John McTernan slapped down by Keir Starmer, not a very positive review of family farming. But we're going to try and be a bit more constructive this hour and think about what Labour could do to improve their policy when it comes to taxing landowners and family-run businesses like these farms here. Ollie, I'll turn to you on this one. You've been looking at the detail of some of these proposals from the Labour government. What do you think they could change that would suit people like you and other family farms better?
Well, if they treated inheritance tax like capital gains tax, and you could roll it over for a generation, so that if your family wants to carry on farming that farm, you pay no tax. But if, say, I die and my children want to sell up and go to Barbados and, realise the asset, then they should be paying tax. But if they had the relief, if they want to farm it, then it will keep family farms together, and that's what it's all about,
So if they could choose to continue farming the land as it's been done in the previous generation, they shouldn't pay tax. But if they're going to just sell it off to go off and do something else, then they should. Capital gains. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's one very reasonable option. And actually, that would maintain the ability to keep family farms in business. They would ultimately be paying tax, because if they're a profitable business, they are paying tax anyway. But it would also maintain that investment, and not just the investment in the food production, which I do believe our farming minister is part of his portfolio is food security. So there's that food production, but it would also maintain that investment in environmental management, and with support from the environmental land management schemes that DEFRA and government are promoting at the moment.
And James, you run this farm. Would you concur with what these two have said?
Yeah, I mean, if we could roll over that relief so that unless my children sold the farm, they wouldn't pay it, it would keep the farm together. And that's exactly what farmers want. They're not trying to dodge tax. They just want a policy that works, that means that we can protect the nation's food security by keeping family farms together.
Yes, and interestingly, the Prime Minister is currently in Azerbaijan at the big climate summit, COP29. We also had the Environmental and Rural Affairs Minister also jetting off for other meetings to do with climate change. Do you think there should be more concentration on actually domestic farming, those types of rural affairs?
Yeah, 100%, because food security is important, and a vibrant rural economy is important. And so they should be here working out what they need to do to keep that.
Yeah, I think there's sometimes an impression that our leaders, our ministers, our great leaders prefer sort of talking on the international stage about lofty aims rather than actually thinking about maybe domestic policy issues that are hitting people hard now.
I think there is a fear, actually, that what we're seeing is those lofty aims, but no recognition of what it actually means on the ground and the impact on family farms. Family farms are rural businesses, and they're not the only rural businesses that will be affected. If family farms are not there in the level they are, the land management skills will disappear, and those rural businesses that work with them will disappear. I think a figure quoted in the past was for every £1 invested in the rural economy, there was in excess of £7 generated. That is quite an economic stimulant. That could well disappear in a lot of cases.
And that would be, well, tragic and terrible for the economy too. James, what would you say to people who say farmers get so many subsidies, you know, we can easily import food cheaper from abroad, and that actually, you know, what John McTernan is saying is right, that actually businesses should be allowed to fail?
Well, I mean, one of the great things about leaving the EU, one of the benefits of Brexit was getting rid of the old EU-based payments where farmers just got money for owning land or renting land, and we've moved now to a system where farmers get paid for delivering public goods. Now, in some parts of the country that's not working as well. Uplands like here is a great example of where those schemes aren't developed yet, but it's really important that we don't just subsidise farmers, but we need domestic food production. National security is food security. It's a core part of that. And we want food to be cheaply and widely available. But in order to do that, we need to have a strong, thriving family farming sector. And that is the real worry about the next couple of years.
Now, my co-host Tom Harwood back in the studio, he's very interested indeed, even quite geeky actually on this one. Regulations and how they impact businesses, things like planning, things like environmental regulations, top-down net zero targets, for example. Robin, are those having an impact on farming, on profits?
Regulation always has, and probably even more so now, because there is an increasing level of regulation that has been imposed top-down on farming without recognition of the impact, or with some very, very dubious science behind it as to whether it's likely to achieve what is being promoted. And, you know, that's around the net zero impacts, the ammonia release from cattle housing, that sort of thing. And these things there seem to be very little in the way of linked policies that actually end up with a truly holistic end to them, that we can actually promote farming as being the responsible way for land management, rather than being treated as a problem.
And Ollie, do you feel that sometimes you're jumping through all these hoops, you're trying to do the right thing, but it's just costing you so much trying to keep up with the endless changes to regulations and the tax regime and everything like that?
It's trying to get the idea that if we're improving, every farmer wants to farm with the environment, 100%. That's why we're here. We want a healthy, happy countryside, but it comes at a cost, and it's trying to get the consumer to understand that it's got to go on food. It's not going to come out of thin air. It's either food or subsidy has got to pay for those carbon improvements.
OK, well, thank you very much to my three farmers here, Robin, Ollie and, of course, James Wright, who owns the farm here, and to Tess as well, our happy dog. Very happy dog indeed. So there was lots to think about there, lots of constructive potential solutions to this problem that we have with family farms, but also that deep concern about what this might mean for the future generations. Back to you, Tom.
Really important stuff. And thank you so much for the introduction to Tess, who I'm sure is going to be a firm favourite of, no offence to the rest of the four of you. There you go. Marvellous Tess. We were describing her there as a good dog. Well, let's cross now to our East Midlands reporter, joining us live from a livestock market in Melton Mowbray, Will Hollis. What's the scene on the ground where you are?
Yes, well, Melton Mowbray is often dubbed the rural capital of food. That's how much this town and the wider county of Leicestershire depends on farming, because it goes to make the beautiful, tasty, delicious treats like Stilton cheese and pork pies. And in the build-up to Christmas, a lot of people will be getting those into their fridge on time. What you can see out here is a 1,000-year-old cattle market. Today, it's not cattle, but the livestock that's been up for auction today is around 4,000 sheep, and these sheep have come from not just this local area, but from across the region. I met somebody from Oxfordshire, for example, who've brought their sheep a few hundred miles to come and sell them at this livestock auction. You can imagine that is the sign that some New sheep are up for sale. The auction is continuing here. We did live reporting here on the ground for GB News. But of these 4,000 or so sheep, the farmers that represent them, most of them are quite unhappy about that announcement of inheritance tax. And I've been speaking to a few of them from a family farm. I've spoken to Clive and Julie, who are fifth-generation farmers in Oakham and would really like to pass down their farm to their children in the future, but now are considering whether they can.
I'm not at all happy about it because I've got 4 children who will inherit off me, and it would probably end up having to be sold because they wouldn't be able to pay the inheritance tax.
And how does that make you feel?
I'm very angry. You know, I think we're being robbed, to be perfectly honest with you. There must be other ways, at least increase the size of the farm, so that the people who can afford it can do it, whereas the small farms like us, there's a lot of us about, will go out of business.
I'm really, really angry because what they don't realise is how hard we work, how hard it is to make a living out of farming, and the small farmer like us, there's over 13,000 of us, and those over 13,000 small farms will just disappear. There will not be small family-run farms. It will all be big corporates.
Well, many of the farmers that I've been speaking to today are now looking ahead to next week when there's going to be the protest and the lobby down in London. I don't think this is going to be the last time that we hear of the issue around inheritance tax. I think it's going to rumble along, but the government says they do need to raise inheritance tax from farmers, which until now have been exempt, because they say that the crumbling public services across Britain need feeding, and the feed that they need is cash, and they reckon they'll raise about £1.8 billion by taxing in farmers when they pass down their farms to their children and their family and friends.
Well, Will Hollis, thank you very much for bringing us not only that report, but also that atmosphere there from Melton Mowbray and that livestock market. Thank you. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Up next, we're going to have the very latest on all of those calls, that crescendo for the Archbishop of Canterbury to resign following more revelations about the church's abuse scandal.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Ed Barker, a talented saxophonist and clarinetist from London, has had a remarkable journey in the music industry marked by significant achievements and an unusual crossover into the political sphere. Having honed his musical skills from a young age, he played in both the National Youth Orchestra and the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. In 2012, he became the solo saxophonist for pop legend George Michael. His reputation in music opened doors in politics, where he's worked with various leading Conservative members of Parliament and played a role in a number of major campaigns. To tell us more about the harmonious relationship between music and politics, I'm delighted to be joined by Ed Barker. This is quite puzzling, actually. How did a reputation in music get you into politics?
It's a good question. It's probably a question I'm still wrestling with at the age of 40. How's it happened? But somehow I've managed to do both, and I still enjoy doing them both at a high level. I think it's a simple thing of, when you're in politics, you're known as the saxophone guy, and when you're in the saxophone music industry world, you're known as the weird conservative political guy. And so it's just something people can remember you by, regardless of how good you are at either of those two things. I think it's just a device that people can kind of just latch onto to remember you.
But it's the word weird, because I imagine that most people in the music industry are probably somewhat to the left. Yeah. Certainly all the ones that I've met are. I mean, I can't imagine you and George Michael discussing Tory politics with approval, or maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, I don't tend to talk politics with people kind of when I'm not in politics somehow. And whenever there are political disagreements, people kind of, I think GB News actually gets closest to kind of embodying this spirit. People are very kind of up for learning from each other's kind of experiences and views and not biting each other's heads off.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 22 minutes past 1. Now, speaking at the COP29, it's not 2019, we're sort of 5 years after that now, but it's the climate summit in Baku. Sir Keir Starmer has unveiled an ambitious new climate target for the UK, reducing carbon emissions by 81% as soon as 2035. Well, the Prime Minister also urged other countries to be ambitious in their own targets and insisted the UK would look to be a world leader on the so-called climate of tomorrow. Are you inspired? Well, this is what the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, had to say earlier today.
I take the positive approach, the carrots approach, not the sticks approach, if you like. You know, the whole thing is, I think government's got to do it, but it's got to be led by government. You know, we need the offshore wind, we need the nuclear, we need the solar, we need the grid, which is going to be controversial with some people. Those are the things that we need, and then we make it easier for people. I want to cut costs for people, Chris. That's what this agenda has got to be all about, and that's what it is about.
What do you say to those who oppose pylons connecting those windmills on a coast to the national grid? Is it up to national interest? Is it thinking for kids?
I do understand concerns about in local communities, and I think that people, and this is what the government wants to do, if you host clean energy infrastructure, you should benefit from it. Your communities should see some direct benefit, potentially in lower bills.
How much?
Well, let's see. But look, the fundamental principle is we do need to build the infrastructure. If we're not going to be exposed as a country, if my constituents in Doncaster aren't going to see those price spikes, which have had such an effect on business as well as families, we do need to build the infrastructure. It is in the national interest.
Critics say you've flown here 2,500 miles here, 2,500 miles back, burning fossil fuels, flying. Is it worth coming here with Donald Trump changing the mood on climate change and drill baby drill, to use that quote about fossil fuels?
I mean, it would have taken me too long to cycle here. It is right to come. It's right in the national interest. And you know, Donald Trump will make his decisions. He's the duly elected president of the United States. He will have to make his decisions as he sees fit. The overwhelming sense I get here from companies and countries is this transition is now unstoppable because it's in our economic interests. You know, you've got so many jobs at stake. You know, we can have leadership for Britain here in good jobs of the future, Chris, and that's what it's all about.
Britain becoming a world leader in not extracting any oil and gas. I wonder if any countries really do want to follow us. Well, discussing this, I'm delighted to be joined by the political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal, because, James, I noticed you reported a pretty peculiar phrase from the president of Azerbaijan, the host of this conference. What was pretty much the first thing he said?
Yes, absolutely, Tom. So the president of Azerbaijan began the conference today by saying something he said many times before, which is he wanted to thank God for the God-given gift of oil, gas and natural resources. It's something very much to the embarrassment of all the climate lobby, of course. He publicly praised the very, very same fossil fuels that Ed Miliband right there was railing against. So it's got off to a really good start in Baku.
I mean, it does make me think, James, given that Donald Trump isn't there, Xi Jinping isn't there, Narendra Modi isn't there, even Emmanuel Macron's not there. I mean, is Britain out on its lonesome saying, come on, guys, follow us, don't extract any of your natural resources, and everyone else is simply going, no thanks?
that is very much going to be the fear, I think, in Westminster and Whitehall as well, which is, of course, that the big target of all of this, the big headline announcement from the UK has been that we're increasing the amount of carbon emissions we're getting rid of by 2035, raising the level of 1990 emissions from 78 to 81%. So that's a big increase. And, of course, Tom, that's happening at the same time as Donald Trump suggests to be leading the world in a very different direction. And I think the danger is the UK is going to be caught between China and the US acting in its own self-interest. And where does that leave us, and where does that leave Ed Miliband and his very expensive green mission?
I mean, given that the UK is, 0.9% of global emissions, and that Donald Trump is likely to, for a second time, pull out of the COP process, pull out of the Paris Accords, I mean, the amount of extra CO2 being pumped out by America might well make up, really, for any reduction that we're doing. Is it time, perhaps, for politicians to talk more about adapting to climate change rather than trying to prevent it?
Well, I think that's an argument that's going to fall on deaf ears with the Labour government. Obviously, they're very keen to talk about, their plan to make Britain a so-called clean energy superpower by 2030. But I do think there's a real sense, perhaps, of, are Labour going to be honest about the costs involved in all this? The key argument you hear from Labour ministers is that we're going to lead in the world in technology. We're going to be first in the so-called global race to developing this kit. But, of course, if America isn't adopting it, that's one thing. And the other point, of course, is that there's a huge amount of costs in the short, medium, and indeed long term as well, because you're only going to see the benefit of this in the 2030s. And frankly, Tom, you'll know better than anyone how little appetite the public has for kind of short-term sacrifice in terms of the long-term interest.
Yeah, just quickly, James, is it sustainable for the government to continue to say that all of this green tech is going to make bills cheaper, when actually the evidence suggests that they're one of the big reasons why bills have been becoming more expensive?
I think that's going to be an argument you hear much more of as well, particularly on the Tory side. And I also think that it's not even just about the green element as well. There's also things like liquid natural gas as well, which I think the Trump presidency is going to be looking at. So what we could see in terms of the energy landscape, if you will, that very different from 2020, 2021. We talk about COP, the Bidenomics, etc. I suspect, Tom, that COP30 will be a very different conversation, albeit I do expect the Azerbaijanis to still be praising oil and gas as well.
Goodness me. Well, to bookend that conversation with that gift from God quote, thank you so much, political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal. Always a pleasure. Well, we're going to jump across to Lambeth Palace now. Is Justin Welby's position now untenable? The Archbishop of Canterbury is facing increased pressure to stand down over his handling of a child abuse scandal, which an independent report into the matter described as a cover-up. The pressure's grown in the last 24 hours as the Prime Minister has refused to back the Archbishop's position, and the Bishop of Newcastle has broken ranks and stated Justin Welby must resign. Let's get the thoughts now of the Anglican priest, Reverend George Pitcher. Reverend, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This is a serious moment for the Archbishop.
Well, thank you for having me, Tom. Yes, it is. I'm mystified slightly that his advisors are said to have told him to hang on and not resign. There's no necessity for him to resign. I'd like to think that if I was still at Lambeth Palace, amongst those advisors I once was, not with Welby, but with his predecessor, Rowan Williams, my line would be, you shouldn't have to resign, but the truth is you will. Therefore, we really ought to be looking at how that should be conducted elegantly and in the best interests of the office of the Archbishop of Canterbury, because he's basically, to use kind of football parlance, he's lost the dressing room. I suppose we should say he's lost the vestry in this sense, but the fact now that not only so many priests, but a bishop in the House of Bishops has come out and called for him to step down means that really that word untenable does crop up. And for the good of the church, and indeed for his own good, he should now be thinking about an orderly transition to a new archbishop. And I think that could be done elegantly.
Well, George, of course, you were there in Lambeth Palace under Rowan Williams. You will know how sort of these things are dealt with behind closed doors. If you would, peel back that curtain for us. Apparently, Justin Welby has cancelled meetings this morning. What conversations will be going on right now in Lambeth Palace?
Well, I fear that Lambeth Palace hasn't become any less of a bubble. I hesitate to use the word bunker, but it does have a rarefied and very strange and sort of isolated existence in there. I don't say that of the Archbishop, who is a good man and he knows what's going on in the world, but I do think that some of those staff aren't really part of the outside world. They look in a very protectionist way inside the walls of Lambeth Palace and try really, in many respects, to keep the world at bay. And this isn't like a corporate institution as we would understand them elsewhere. It's not a democracy, and it's almost as if they're courtiers rather than a corporate institution.
Well, we're keeping our eyes peeled on that court this afternoon.
This is a police matter and you don't need to resign, you know. And that's, I think, what worries many of us in the church.
Absolutely. Well, Anglican priest Reverend George Pitcher, really appreciate your thoughts and your expertise on this issue. Must say, in response to those allegations, the Archbishop of Canterbury has said in this statement, "I recognise the courage of those victims, including those related to John Smythe, who came forward and relived their trauma through contributing to this review. I have no idea or suspicion of this abuse before 2013. Nevertheless, the review is clear that I personally failed to ensure that after disclosure in 2013, the awful tragedy was energetically investigated. Since that time, the way in which the Church of England engages with victims and survivors has changed beyond recognition." Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Coming up, can we really clean up our energy grid by 2030, and who on earth is going to pay for it? More on that next, but this is after your news headlines with Lewis Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good afternoon. It's just after 1:30. Here are your latest GB News headlines. The Prime Minister has pledged an 81% cut to UK emissions by 2035 at the UN Climate Summit in Azerbaijan. Sir Keir Starmer says there is a huge opportunity for the UK to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow, which means better jobs and economic growth in the UK. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say earlier on today.
Let me be clear. There is no national security, there is no economic security, there is no global security without climate security. And this is a huge opportunity for investment, for UK businesses, for British workers, if we act now to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow.
Well, closer to home, the PM has refused to give his backing to the Archbishop of Canterbury over his handling of child abuse claims. Sir Keir Starmer says it was the matter for the Church as pressure grows for Justin Welby to stand down. It comes after a damning report into the suspected abuse of over 100 children by a well-known barrister associated with the Church of England. The report also claims that the institution had played a role in covering up the accusations when details initially came to light in 2013. A once-a-day pill that could help tens of thousands of people give up cigarettes and prevent thousands of smoking-related deaths each year will be rolled out on the NHS. The pill works by tackling nicotine cravings and also helps with withdrawal symptoms such as irritability and trouble sleeping. Official estimates say it could help more than 85,000 people give up smoking over the next 5 years, as well as prevent 9,500 smoking-related deaths. And finally, Gary Lineker will step down as the host of Match of the Day at the end of the current season. The 63-year-old former England striker has presented Match of the Day since 1999, which amounts to almost 26 years in the role. Lineker was the BBC's highest-paid on-air talent for 7 consecutive years. Mark Chapman, Gabby Logan and Alex Scott are the current frontrunners to replace the former England star. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. There's more from me in half an hour's time.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another fine day for most of us with sunny spells, although there will be some stubborn fog patches slow to clear into the afternoon, and one or two spots could get a few showers, most notably the east and southeast of England, with a northeasterly breeze picking up some moisture from the North Sea. Otherwise, high pressure is firmly in control of the weather, and with light winds and clear skies overnight, we have seen some fog this morning. In some spots, Northern Ireland, for example, parts of central Scotland, that fog may last until the afternoon. For many other places, though, it's a dry and bright day, some patchy cloud coming into the Midlands, eastern and southeastern England, one or two showers. Otherwise, dry and feeling pleasant enough with light winds towards the north and the west and some sunshine, but temperatures are going to fall away quickly into the evening under those clear skies, and it's going to be another chilly night. And nevertheless, plenty of fine weather to end the day. That fog reforming very quickly, and in some places where it hasn't cleared, it's just going to continue into the evening across Northern Ireland and central parts of Scotland. Meanwhile, the northwest of Scotland will see a thickening of the cloud and some patchy drizzle arrive overnight, a freshening breeze as well. A weakening weather front is going to sink south into northwest Scotland. That, of course, means it's going to be a much milder night for northern and western Scotland. Northern Ireland, likewise, will see the cloud increase overnight, perhaps clearing the fog by dawn. But it's across central parts of the UK where we'll see the clearest skies and the coldest air first thing, some fog patches, a touch of frost in places. The far south and southeast, enough of a breeze, and those showers continuing means that it won't be a frosty or foggy start here. But one or two further showers are likely across parts of Kent. Meanwhile, the cloud and drizzly outbreaks of rain sink south across Scotland and Northern Ireland through the day. And it's a milder day across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it's colder further south.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to the M6 in Warwickshire. Firstly, the southbound side, Coles Hill down to Coventry. That's junction 4 down to 3. There's a breakdown blocking a lane, causing delays. A couple of lorries are broken down on the M25, so anti-clock after Enfield 25. Lane 1's off next to the roadworks, and that's slow. And then just between 12 for the M3 and Staines 13 on the clockwise side. On the hard shoulder there, the inside lane's also coned off for that broken down lorry. You're heading towards Maidenhead in Berkshire, the southbound A404M, just away from junction 9A. That's Cox Green down towards the M4 to 8. Part blocked again, there's a breakdown there. M5 southbound's now reopened 24 to 25 towards Taunton, but the A38 and the A39 remain solid both ways. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. Now we're going to return to the climate summit, indeed getting right back to that idea that bills might well go up after these policies of stricter emission cuts come into force. Delighted to be joined now by the Shadow Energy and Net Zero Secretary, Claire Coutinho. Claire, thank you so much for making the time this afternoon. Firstly, do you believe the government when they say that this new agenda can actually lead to lower bills?
Well, Tom, it's not a question about what I believe or not, because last week, the National Energy Systems Operator produced a report on Ed Miliband's flagship project to decarbonise the grid by 2030. And we could see in black and white that this is going to make the cost of electricity in this country more expensive. So that is written there in that report. And the thing that I think is extremely worrying is that they've been promising the British electorate something very different. They said that they were going to cut bills by £300 by 2030, but we can now all see in this report that that is simply just not true.
Why then is the government continuing to say that bills will come down? I don't quite understand. They must not be inventing this from nowhere.
Well, let me talk you through it. So the report makes a series of fantastical assumptions and says if we reach these assumptions, then we could have a similarly costed price of electricity. But that includes having an international gas price which is 40% higher than the Ed's department's own forecasts. It means having a carbon price which is almost double what it is now, something which is largely in the gift of ministers. It means that you would have to vastly increase the amount of offshore wind and grid that you would build with not a single planning delay and not moving prices at all. And if you can achieve all of those things, then the system costs are roughly the same. So if you miss even just one of those fantastical assumptions, you are going to see a much, much greater increase in the cost of electricity. So I think it is simply wrong for ministers. It's simply wrong for the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State, Ed Miliband, to claim that that report shows that the cost of electricity would be cheaper under their approach.
OK, but Claire, up until July, you were sitting where Ed Miliband sits today. You were the Energy Secretary, and yet you kept to many of these similar targets of an electricity net zero grid by 2035, of net zero, of banning fracking onshore, banning onshore wind farms. I mean, surely a lot of this blame also falls at your doorstep.
Well, so I inherited a series of targets, and I was given to the department about a year ago, and I was asked by the then Prime Minister to get under the bonnet and look at what was achievable or not. So we started out, as you'll remember, quite famously doing a reset on net zero and rolling some of the targets back, which we thought were going to increase costs for consumers. And then all of the work that I was doing in the department was to look at how this is working. And that's why now I'm able to say this stuff with so much conviction. So I was arguing for the largest expansion of nuclear power in 30 years. I was arguing for the need for more gas power plants. I commissioned in the department a full systems cost analysis. And the reason I had done that is because actually now that we can see what the full systems cost approach is, we can see that it is going to make the cost of electricity much higher. So I do think there is a way to make our energy system cleaner and more secure. For me, that means a lot more nuclear. And that was the work that I was doing. But you're right, there were targets that I think we signed up to over the last 40 years. I wasn't imposed for all of those. I wasn't in the House for all of those. But I think that we signed up to them without looking at the practical implementation closely enough. But that's exactly what I'm arguing against now.
Do you think that there's a shift happening in the world now, post the election of Donald Trump in the United States? Does the government need to look differently at its entire energy policy compared to even a week ago?
Well, let me just tell you about the sort of nonsensical approach that I think they're taking. And this is something that I was saying in Post. We are 1% of global emissions. 99% of emissions are happening elsewhere. Ours are falling, others are rising. And if we make electricity really expensive in this country, all we will do is push our industry and jobs abroad to places like China, for example, which is still 60% powered by coal. And all that means is that you've got fewer jobs here and you've got more carbon in the atmosphere. So even if your primary goal in life is to tackle climate change, you think this is incredibly urgent, what you're doing is incredibly counterproductive. So I think it is really imperative that we take a rational look at what is happening, make sure that we prioritize cheap power, and cheap power comes first for this country. And actually, we should take a much more innovation-led approach to thinking about how we can contribute to climate change, because there's products, there's things that we could make in this country and export to other parts of the world where emissions are rising, and that would have a much greater impact overall.
Now, I get what you're saying, particularly on nuclear reactors, small modular reactors, really exciting technology there. But just lastly, Claire Coutinho, would you consider in the short term, during the transition, expanding the use of oil and gas in the United Kingdom, extracting more of our own natural resources, even onshore in that sense, as after all, the president of COP, or the president of Afghanistan hosting COP, called those same natural resources a gift from God?
Well, let's look at domestic gas, for example. That makes up 50% of our supply. And at the moment, what the Labour Party are doing is squeezing that out of the system in favour of things like biomass, which is much more expensive and produces more carbon than our last coal power plant. So again, I think it means overall we need to take a rational approach to this. We need to make sure we're putting the people of this country first and the cost of their energy first.
OK, well, Shadow Energy and Net Zero Secretary Claire Coutinho, thanks so much for joining us and talking through those issues this afternoon. Appreciate your time. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more coming up on today's programme, including members of the Trump cabinet posing a change, perhaps, to the government's plans to surrender the Chagos Islands. What's happening there?
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Young adults spend a few years living away from home at university, those who go to university, but many then have no choice but to move back in with their parents because of the rising cost of renting.
But is this an excuse, and are Gen Z or Z just being lazy?
No, I mean, what do you make of it, Debbie? Because we do have to have some sympathy, don't we, in that, you know, rents are very high, it's very hard to get a mortgage. There are issues there.
I think the push towards young people to go to university as well is not necessarily the right thing for a lot of people. And I think people should start work early. These guys leave their universities with a huge amount of debt, no jobs, or huge rent. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. So I think we've got to look at the work ethic and start it younger. Because I think it's so easy just to move back with your mum and dad, isn't it?
To speak like a Gen Zer, they would say that, well, it's OK for your generation, you had it easy.
Realistically, that isn't quite that true, because a lot of people then didn't go to university. This is a relatively new thing that everybody goes to university.
I have to say, what strikes me today is that you still have, amongst all these problems, not having enough money, going to university when perhaps you shouldn't be, all these sort of issues, you still get all these people saying, well, I'm going to have a year out.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think the thing is, they say, oh, it was easy for you, but it wasn't really. We still had to rent places.
But the thing is with this debate, Debbie, is the generation we're talking about, Gen Z, who we're accusing of being lazy, have been raised by our generation.
Yeah.
So what have we done wrong that, if they are lazier, has made them like that?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 10 to 2. Now, following the election that stunned the world with the US president, Donald Trump, or at least president-elect that is, has wasted no time in appointing people to his top team. According to reports, the president-elect could appoint Florida Senator and former presidential rival Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. And the military veteran Michael Waltz is reportedly being made Trump's national security advisor. Well, Waltz himself has been an outspoken figure in the debate regarding the UK's abandonment of sovereignty over the Chagos Islands, with the potential security advisor comparing that deal to the West abandoning Afghanistan. So could this Trump appointment return the Chagos Islands to British hands? Well, let's get to the thoughts of Republicans Overseas Chairman Greg Swenson. Greg, thanks so much for being in the studio with us now. These appointments are pretty significant, but let's start with the Chagos dispute. Could American policy change on this?
Absolutely, it could. And you know, Trump, look, President Trump is a man of action. He'll do a lot on day one. That very well might be on the list. I hope it is, and it should be, because there was a complete mistake by not only the government here, but President Biden twisting Keir's arm to do it. I think it's a huge mistake. And so, yeah, I think President Trump will have that on the list day one.
Because, of course, it's such an important US military base in Diego Garcia, which would be surrounded by islands that would almost come into the orbit of the Chinese regime.
That's right.
One of the interesting things about the two names that I've mentioned there, Michael Waltz and Marco Rubio, is just how hawkish they are
Both
on
hawks,
China.
yeah, for sure. I mean, Marco's been very active, and Waltz was on the committee that was led by Mike Gallagher, the committee on China on the CCP. So, yeah, both of those guys are real China hawks. They're hawks in general, which isn't really, that doesn't mean they're pro-war. I mean, you know, Trump is obviously an anti-war president, but the whole argument of peace through strength was one of Trump's major themes in his first administration, and I think it will be again. You know, the best way to prevent war is prepare for war. And after 3 years, now 4 years of defense cuts, 3% per year of defense cuts by the Biden administration, that's not good for Europe, it's not good for NATO, and it's definitely not good for our Pacific partners.
What was it that Ronald Reagan said? Talk softly and carry a big stick.
Yeah, and among others, and so, but it's true, and Reagan was the first champion of peace through strength, and it worked. You know, really, there was no significant boots on the ground during the Reagan years, and you could say the same for Trump 1.0, his first term. So it's a theory that works, and I think you'll see it again from President Trump.
Interesting that these are perhaps more establishment figures of the Republican side, that this is perhaps a more unifying Trump administration than the sort of exclusively MAGA situation. But of course, this has huge implications for China, for the Americans' sort of position vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, without a doubt. And look, you know, Marco came up in the Tea Party movement. He was elected to his first position in 2010. Waltz is from the same generation, Army veteran, West Point graduate. So not really establishment, but not necessarily like, you know, full-on MAGA supporters. And remember, Marco ran against President Trump in 2016, which kind of counters the narrative that you hear, especially in the corporate media, that, you know, Trump doesn't keep friends and Trump holds grudges. No, he's had a really good relationship with Marco for the last 8 years. So good for him. And, you know, in terms of the China perspective, look, they are running circles around the U.S. in terms of shipbuilding right now. Granted, our carrier fleet and our carrier forces are bigger and better, but in terms of sheer numbers, they're in the mid 400s in terms of numbers of ships. We're down to 299. We're significantly below what we need to be.
Shipbuilding, absolutely astonishing, given how strong the American economy is in so many other senses. Just very, very briefly, if you're a betting man, this Chagos deal, it's not yet signed, it's been agreed but not signed. Will it be blown up?
Dead on arrival. Blown up.
Dead on arrival. Well, Greg Swenson, thank you so much for talking us through some pretty speedy appointments, or I should say potential appointments, from President-elect Donald Trump. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and plenty more coming up on today's show, so please don't go anywhere. I want to draw your attention to concerned residents in Altrincham who have been protesting the use of a local hotel being taken over by 300 asylum seekers. The latest news there, the asylum seekers may well be given private health care at the taxpayers' expense. We'll be getting to that later in the programme, but first, here's your weather.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a fine day for most of us out there, but there is some fog remaining in places and there'll be further fog continuing overnight. Also some frost under this area of high pressure, which is keeping the weather settled at the moment, and it's a clearer area of high pressure compared with last week. And that means less low cloud, although there is still some patchy cloud, especially for East Anglia and the southeast overnight. Some showers running into Kent, along with a brisk breeze. At the other end of the country, northwest Scotland prone to thickening cloud and some drizzle overnight. That keeps it mild, but in between, a slice of clear sky and some frost and fog to wake up to first thing Wednesday. So for northwest Scotland, it's a milder start to the day with cloud and drizzle coming in from the northwest. And that's going to slowly spread its way southeastwards through the day. But it's bright enough for Aberdeenshire into the Grampians first thing. Northern Ireland, a fairly mixed bag in the morning with a lot of cloud cover, some mist and fog patches. Wales, plenty of bright weather. That's also extending into parts of the Midlands and Northern England, although some fog and frost will be about first thing. Fog and frost free in the southeast, where we've got some cloud and some showers early on, but actually the showers largely disappear by the afternoon as the wind direction changes. Meanwhile, cloud spreads across much of Scotland, avoiding the east but also spilling into Northern Ireland, and it'll be a milder day in the northwest with highs of 12 or 13 Celsius. Plenty of bright weather further south though, and we end the afternoon with some sunny spells for the south and southeast after a relatively cloudy start. Nevertheless, it does turn cloudy fairly widely on Wednesday night, and into Thursday we keep that cloud cover, so a milder start to the day, but then it turns colder during Friday and Saturday from the north.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's only 2 weeks.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Tuesday, the 12th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver, and I'm here at Fernham Farm. I've got the pitchfork at the ready to help out with some of the chores, the everyday tasks around the farm. We've got the heifers in the background, and I'm going to be finding out exactly how Labour's tax raid is going to impact family farms.
I'm looking forward to seeing you clearing out those stables. Fantastic stuff. Well, Emily will be bringing us perspectives across throughout the show. Elsewhere, pressure is growing on the Archbishop of Canterbury to resign this afternoon, following the latest revelations in the John Smythe review, with the Bishop of Newcastle claiming his position is untenable. Sir Keir Starmer is in Azerbaijan for the Global Climate Conference. Elsewhere, today he has committed the UK to even harsher emission reduction targets. Are you willing to stump up more cash for the climate? And Altrincham residents are furious as they learn hundreds of illegal migrants in their local hotels will receive private healthcare alongside their free accommodation. All courtesy, of course, of the taxpayer. Now, Emily, I have to say, I loved looking at you holding that pitchfork. You've got a Herculean task ahead of you.
I do have a Herculean task, but these heifers also do. Of course, they're all pregnant, and they've been eating absolutely all day. The amount of straw that they're getting through between them is stunning. They've had breakfast, they've had brunch, they've had lunch, they've had tunch, they've had tea, they've had dinner, they've had supper. A little bit later on, that will be supper. But yes, I'm on the farm here. I'm learning about what farmers actually make of all of these tax changes coming down the line. What do they make of this death tax? It's been suddenly imposed on them. And you know what strikes me is that they're really worried about the lack of foresight that there's been, and it makes it impossible for them to plan for the future and for their children, who they're hoping will take over their farms.
A really, really important story, and also very important work to do. So we'll get to you, Emily, hopefully, mucking out those sheds very, very soon. Well, of course, comment along. gbnews.com/yoursay is the way to get involved in the programme. All to come, of course, after your news headlines with Lewis Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good afternoon. It's just after 2 o'clock here in the GB newsroom. Here are your latest headlines. The Prime Minister has pledged an 81% cut to UK emissions by 2035 at the UN Climate Summit in Azerbaijan. Sir Keir Starmer says there is a huge opportunity for the UK to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow, which he describes as better jobs and economic growth in the UK. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say earlier on today.
Let me be clear. There is no national security, there is no economic security, there is no global security without climate security. And this is a huge opportunity for investment, for UK businesses, for British workers, if we act now to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow.
The PM has refused to give his backing to the Archbishop of Canterbury over his handling of child abuse claims. Sir Keir Starmer said it was a matter for the Church as pressure grows for Justin Welby to stand down. It comes after a damning report into the suspected abuse of over 100 children by a well-known barrister associated with the Church of England. The report also claims that the institution had played a role in covering up the accusations when details initially came to light in 2013. Terminally ill adults who are expected to die within 6 months would be able to request assistance to end their own life under the proposed end-of-life bill. But someone with a disability or mental health issues will not be eligible. The controversial bill has raised some concerns that people could feel pressured into ending their lives prematurely. Labour MP Kim Leadbeater, who put forward the bill, says it includes the strictest safeguards anywhere in the world. MPs will have their first vote on the proposals on the 29th of November. A once-a-day pill that could help tens of thousands of people giving up cigarettes and preventing thousands of smoking-related deaths each year will be rolled out on the NHS. The pill works by tackling nicotine cravings and also helps the withdrawal symptoms such as irritability and trouble sleeping. Official estimates say it could help more than 85,000 people give up smoking over the next 5 years, as well as prevent 9,500 smoking-related deaths. Wage growth has fallen to its lowest level in more than 2 years, while joblessness in the UK has jumped by more than expected. The Office for National Statistics says the average regular earnings growth eased back to only 4.8% in the 3 months to September. That's down from 4.9% in the previous 3 months. This marked the lowest level since June of 2022. The ONS also says the rate of UK unemployment rose from 4% to 4.3% in the previous 3 months. Boris Johnson has told GB News that Sir Keir Starmer is not doing enough to stop foreign criminals in the UK. The former Prime Minister says it is time to review the ECHR and says the Rwanda plan would have worked. It comes as the number of migrants crossing the English Channel in small boats is likely to hit 40,000 by the end of the year, according to maritime security sources, as almost 33,000 have now made the illegal journey so far this year. A Home Office spokesman said, "We will stop at nothing to bring the people smuggling gangs to justice." Here's what the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson told GB News.
And I really believe that would have been a huge deterrent to illegal migration. It would have been a huge deterrent. It might be time to review the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, because I think sometimes it is being applied in a way that is anti-democratic and that is stopping the removal of people who plainly need to be removed.
Queen Camilla will return to public duties today after her chest infection. The Queen is attending the Booker Prize reception at Clarence House today, but will meet guests for a shorter period than initially planned. She was forced to withdraw from her duties last week and missed the weekend's Remembrance Day commemorations events. And finally, Gary Lineker will step down as host of the Match of the Day at the end of the current season. The 63-year-old former England striker has presented Match of the Day since 1999, which amounts to 26 years in the role. Lineker was the BBC's highest paid on-air talent for 7 consecutive years. Mark Chapman, Gabby Logan and Alex Scott are the current frontrunners to replace the former England star. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines from me. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. More from me in half an hour's time.
Breaking news to bring you here on GB News. In the last few minutes, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has resigned. He was under increasing pressure after a report criticised his handlings of the allegations against John Smythe, who sexually abused hundreds of children in the 1970s and 1980s. Well, we can head straight over to Lambeth Palace now and speak to GB News correspondent Olivia Utley, who's been following this story for us all day. Olivia.
Yes, it feels as though Justin Welby was bowing to the inevitable. Last week, he said that he was going to stay in the post. He said that he had considered resigning, but had decided against it. That position became untenable by this morning. The Bishop of Newcastle, along with 3 very senior members of the clergy, members of the Synod, along with a whole plethora of Smythe's victims, said that Justin Welby had to go. At the same time, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, refused to back the Archbishop of Canterbury. He said that these were very, very troubling allegations, and he did not want to brush aside just how serious these allegations were. It was very clear that Parliament and the Synod had turned against the Archbishop of Canterbury. He has now said that he is going to step down, and in his resignation statement, he says that he hopes this resignation will show just how seriously the Church of England takes these abuses. We don't yet have a timeline on when we can expect him to stand down. He says that that will be a matter for the Anglican Church, and he wants to carry on upholding his constitutional duties. But he has said he will hand over his responsibilities for safeguarding for somebody else for the rest of his time in office. The allegations levelled at Justin Welby was that he did not take seriously enough the abuse allegations from John Smythe. John Smythe was a lay preacher who ran Christian camps in Zimbabwe in the 1970s and 80s. He was found to have abused 130 or so children. But when Justin Welby was informed of this abuse in 2013, Welby was told incorrectly that the matter had been reported to the police, and Welby didn't look into it any further. He let the matter be brushed under the carpet. That has led to the victims of Smythe never receiving justice. Smythe died in 2018 while Hampshire police were still investigating him. So that is why Justin Welby felt the need to step down today. It really does throw the Church of England into a very difficult position.
has been such a staple of British cultural life since he assumed the role back in 2013. But Olivia, I've got to say, I've got his resignation statement in front of me here. Let's just read it through. The statement from the Archbishop of Canterbury being released in the last few minutes. He says as follows. Having sought the gracious permission of His Majesty the King, I have decided to resign as Archbishop of Canterbury. The Macon Review has exposed the long-maintained conspiracy of silence about the heinous abuses of John Smythe. When I was informed in 2013 and told that police had been notified, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. It is very clear that I must take personal and institutional responsibility for the long and re-traumatising period between 2013 and 2024. It's my duty to honour my constitutional and church responsibilities, so exact timings will be decided once a review of necessary obligations has been completed, including those in England and in the Anglican Communion. I hope this decision makes clear how seriously the Church of England understands the need for change and our profound commitment to creating a safer church. As I step down, I do so in sorrow with all victims and survivors of abuse. The last few days have renewed my long-felt and profound sense of shame at the historic safeguarding failures of the Church of England. For nearly 12 years, I have struggled to introduce improvements. It is for others to judge what has been done. In the meantime, I will follow through on my commitment to meet victims. I will delegate all my other current responsibilities for safeguarding until the necessary risk assessment process is complete. I ask everyone to keep my wife, Caroline, and my children in their prayers. They have been my most important support throughout my ministry, and I am eternally grateful for their sacrifice. Caroline led the Spouses programme during the Lambeth Conference and has travelled tirelessly in areas of conflict, supporting the most vulnerable, the women, and those who care for them locally. I believe that stepping aside is in the best interests of the Church of England, which I dearly love, and which I have been honoured to serve. I pray this decision points us back towards the love that Jesus Christ has for every one of us. For above all else, my deepest commitment is to the person of Jesus Christ, my Saviour and my Lord, the bearer of the sins and the burdens of the world, and the hope of every person. Well, that was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, in his resignation statement. Olivia Utley, your reaction?
Well, I think what makes things difficult for Justin Welby is he talks there about his reflections over the last few days. But the truth is, he was pushed. He didn't really jump. It was just 5 days ago that he said that he wasn't planning on resigning. He said that he had considered resigning and had decided against it. He only stepped down today when it became clear that his position was untenable, because he just did not have the support of the Church of England clergy nor of Parliament. So I think that makes that slightly undermines the statement that he has made. I think the other issue that is worth dwelling on for a minute is the fact that Justin Welby has sort of built a rod for his own back, and possibly built a rod for his successors' back too, in that every time there's been this sort of major political issue, something like, for example, the talk about reparations for slavery back in the 17 or 1800s, Justin Welby has weighed in on these issues. He has sort of presented the Church of England as a political body, and so when he himself is found to have fallen short of standards, I think it makes it more difficult for him than perhaps somebody else in his position. I think that's a really awkward position for an Archbishop of Canterbury to be in. It'll be fascinating to see how this replacement process takes place and who replaces Archbishop Justin Welby, because as far as I'm aware, there hasn't really been a case like this before, with an Archbishop having to resign under such a cloud and really so abruptly.
Absolutely. It does seem that this is uncharted waters for Lambeth Palace. They must have been having crisis meetings all day. Olivia, you were saying earlier that meetings this morning were indeed cancelled.
Yeah, meetings were cancelled this morning, and it was said that at a meeting that was planned for this afternoon, I don't know whether it went ahead in the end or if Welby jumped the gun by resigning before it was to take place. There was to be a meeting at Church House where it would be made clear to the people of Lambeth Palace behind me that Parliament was no longer standing behind Justin Welby. So I think from this morning it was clear that he had no choice but to step away. But as I say, I think what makes this very, very awkward, both for Welby and for the Church of England, is that just last week Welby was happily telling journalists that although he had had a period of reflection, he had chosen not to resign. He didn't jump, he was pushed, and he was pushed by Parliament, by those members of the Synod, by various victims of John Smythe, and this morning by the Archbishop of Newcastle as well. So a really, really tricky position that Welby found himself in, and that he actually leaves the Church of England in now.
It's interesting to note, you mentioned Parliament. Of course, the Member of Parliament, Nick Timothy, has been scathing in his calls for Welby to stand down, saying that there is this almost blind spot. He's been unembarrassed about involving himself in contentious political issues, whether or not it's the asylum policies of the previous government, which he called, which he said could not stand the judgment of God, or whether it's involving himself in Black Lives Matter protests, setting up the Archbishop's Commission on Racial Justice. He's been very moralistic, perhaps understandably, for an Archbishop, on so many areas. But then this area of child abuse connected with the Church of England, where not enough was done, where he knew that it was going on, and seemingly didn't pursue it because he felt it was simply for the police to do after 2013. Fairly extraordinary that, on the one hand, he was crusading on so many different areas, whether it's the Rwanda asylum scheme or Black Lives Matter controversy or the Archbishop's Commission on Racial Justice, but so blind to the real abuse within people connected to the church.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes his position so difficult, and why he had to step down today. As you say, Tom, perhaps it is right for an Archbishop of Canterbury to take a stand on these very political issues. Justin Welby's supporters have always said that, you know, there is no point in a modern Church of England unless it does take a stand on these intrinsically moral issues. But his detractors would argue that Justin Welby has made the position of Archbishop of Canterbury more overtly political than any of his predecessors. You mentioned there, Tom, the fact that he weighed in on the Rwanda policy of the previous government. He wasn't scared of making himself an enemy of the Conservatives, or perhaps just Conservatives generally, people, small c Conservatives. Justin Welby did not count himself as one of them, and did not mind if he made himself an enemy of them. And I think in a way that has been part of his undoing. Nick Timothy MP, Conservative MP, former advisor to Theresa May, actually, and a big supporter of the Rwanda plan, was one of the people who had tabled an amendment today saying that Justin Welby's position was untenable. I'm sure there are plenty on the Conservative benches who will be quite pleased to see the back of the Archbishop. And I think the fact that he made himself such a political figure did make his position in Lambeth Palace really, really awkward when it became clear that he did have this enormous blind spot when it came to sexual abuse within the Church of England.
Absolutely stunning story. Olivia Utley, we're going to be, of course, keeping across the details on this all afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us there at Lambeth Palace. Of course, that is the news. That is the breaking news in the last few minutes, that Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, has sought the view of the King in order to resign as Archbishop of Canterbury. We're going to bring you much more on this story throughout the afternoon on GB News. We're going to have much more on that resignation after this short break.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, let's speak now to Sales Director at Savills for Quinta Properties, Raquel Santos, who is live for us in Portugal. Raquel, good to see you this morning. Why are all these celebrities flocking to Portugal all of a sudden?
Yeah, I guess it's just because of basically the great lifestyle that we have, security, you know. Portugal has kind of been a hidden, tucked away gem for quite a while that people didn't realize existed. And with the international flights that have, with the American flights coming in, it's kind of been put back on the map as a country that's worth visiting and worth investing in due to the secure investments that we offer in real estate.
Raquel, is it anything to do with tax rates? Because I think capital gains tax is, I think if it's over a certain amount, you pay half of your rate, which is 28%. Capital gains on shares and cryptocurrencies is 0. Is it anything to do with that? Because over here in the UK, big storm at the moment about millionaires apparently leaving in exodus because of the mooted increases in taxes in just a few weeks.
Yeah, so obviously the alterations that are happening with the UK in terms of the tax that's being implemented on the capital gains, as you mentioned, we've definitely noticed has become a big drive, mostly on the vendor side as well, who are looking to sell because they don't want to be hit, you know, with these higher capital gains, which is close to coming into effect.
Raquel, have you noticed then millionaires, high net worth people from the UK getting in touch with you looking to relocate?
Definitely. It's for multiple reasons, obviously, the changes that are due to come into place, obviously, and Portugal just seems to be a safe option always when things do kind of change. People opt to come into Portugal because we're quite steady, we're quite stable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 23 minutes past 2. Now we're going to get more on that news of the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury. This, of course, follows a review into how the church handled allegations against a man called John Smythe. He carried out abuse against hundreds of boys, of children, during his time as someone connected deeply with the Church of England. Indeed, there was one example of a child who died under the care of Mr. Smythe. Mr. Smythe himself died in 2018. But we'll get more on the reaction to the resignation of the Archbishop. Let's speak to the journalist and former government special advisor, James Price. James, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, because this is a very serious moment for the Church of England.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the pressure has been building for a little while now. I mean, I myself wrote a piece less than an hour before the announcement actually came out. I think where the burst in the dam was really coming from was that members of the clergy, you know, people who effectively work for the now resigned Archbishop, had started to put their heads above the parapet very, very bravely, it must be said, and called for him to go. I think even a bishop yesterday said that it was time. And you know, much like with the resignation of politicians, once that kind of ratcheting effect happens, it becomes almost inevitable. And I think it's probably a good thing that it didn't rumble on anymore and damage the church any more than it already has done.
Now, in his statement, the Archbishop wrote about the long-maintained conspiracy of silence against the heinous abuses of John Smythe. He goes on to say that when he was informed in 2013 and told the police had been notified, he thought that an appropriate resolution was followed. He sort of thought that, OK, he was told, but the police were handling it. He didn't need to do anything. That seems to be the biggest misstep, the biggest lapse in judgment in this entire story.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And I suspect this is of course, as with all resignation letters, I've had to write a few for politicians in my time. This is the first stab at writing your own obituary, or writing your own history that a senior figure like this gets to make. And if it's merely been a sin of omission on his part, then that will be the most minor way that anybody could ever possibly look at this. Other interpretations, of course, are that Welby, when he was a much younger man, was a voluntary, a dormitory officer at some of the camps that were run by this disgusting man, John Smythe, where a lot of this abuse was taking place. And so the idea that he could be in that kind of role and would know absolutely nothing about any of the untoward behavior might strike some as a little bit far-fetched, a little bit hard to swallow. And in fact, again, some members of the clergy, the very brave Reverend Giles Fraser, said as much, that it was difficult to believe that in a piece that he wrote. And I think that a lot of this comes down to the very Christian ideas that we as a society, whether we realize it or not, still hold very, very dear. Ideas about forgiveness, ideas about justice, and the kind of difficult interplay that those things have. You have a world, a pre-Christian world of ancient Rome, where it's all the sort of the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. This is what, in fact, Thucydides says in the history of the Peloponnesian Wars, going back even further to the Greek times. And then you have the arrival of Jesus, or at least in the kind of, even if you don't go into the sort of metaphysical beliefs of it all, you have the concepts of Christianity coming into the world. Things like mercy and grace, which is to forgive people who don't deserve to be forgiven, and the difficult interplay that ideas like that have with the older school style of justice that you get in the Old Testament and that you get in kind of pre-Christian Europe. And so maybe some of these things are kind of swirling around Justin Welby as he was weighing up what to do. But so most of us, it would strike us as absolutely abhorrent that you could ever not do everything in your power to prevent the sexual abuse and violence abuse against young people. It's very probably the worst crime that any of us can possibly think of. And I think that's quite why he had to go. And then knowing about this and not doing anything is itself a sin, I'm afraid.
It is fascinating, the sort of competing versions of history here. Welby, in his statement, of course, says that he knew nothing before 2013, at which point the police knew, so how on earth could he have known that he was supposed to do more, but he should have done more, that's why he resigned. That's his version of history. But as you mentioned, James, there are others. There are people who, on this programme earlier today, have alleged that since the 1980s, senior individuals in the church knew about this man. Justin Welby himself has been alleged to have known at least some details about what John Smythe was like. And of course, you had the mysterious emigration of John Smythe to various African countries after his decades of operating within the United Kingdom. There are, of course, certain allegations, certain sort of steps that one can think about how this was all brushed under the carpet. Thank you, sir. Please move abroad and we'll all forget about it.
Yeah, quite. And I mean, that would be absolutely damning in itself. And I suppose we use damning here in almost a literal sense, if we're talking about Christian metaphysics in a way. The idea of, we get him out of England, he can just go to Africa and that won't matter so much. They'll be out of sight and out of mind. I mean, that's a pretty disgusting way to think, if that's indeed what happened, or if anything like that happened at all, and that needs to be investigated. You've seen an awful lot of these sorts of stories coming out of the Roman Catholic Church, and you've seen the movies. I think there was a film called Spotlight that goes into the undercover work that was done to expose some of the systematic abuse of children in the Roman Catholic Church, and Anglicans probably looked on at that and thinking, gosh, thank goodness we haven't got too much of that. Of course, it looks like we do have more of this. And so there's a lot of soul searching that needs to happen inside the Church of England. Now, the big problem I've got, and as I say, I'll leave some of the Anglican and Church of England parts of this to people who are better qualified than me. I mentioned the Reverend Giles Fraser. There's also the Reverend Marcus Walker and Reverend Fergus Butler Gailey are all amazingly brave priests who've stuck their head up and said that this is what needed to have happened. And I'm in awe of their bravery. I'm not sure I could do that to my boss so publicly. But it's, of course, not just a religious role. You see that resignation letter. He had to get permission, Justin Welby, from His Majesty the King for this, and there are important constitutional and social and civic roles that he plays. He was front and centre at the funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. He was front and centre at the coronation of His Majesty himself. So you see, he's got a big leadership role in the kind of moral leadership of the United Kingdom and of Anglicans around the world. And instead of focusing on perhaps some of the spiritual elements of that, instead of focusing on the fact that churches are closing down, that pews are emptying, that hymns are going unsung at weekends, he felt it better to be talking about fiscal policy, about domestic policy, about telling the last Conservative government that Rwanda was an evil, nasty thing, to go on about tax rises and to go on about everything, in fact, other than the way that his own church was performing. And clearly, as it turns out now, some much, much darker things as well. And I think that's something that makes this relevant to everybody here. I mean, we've got a time in the United Kingdom, in Europe, in America, around the world where issues like identity and culture and moral issues are becoming more and more important. And it's a confusing world out there. You know, you would need somebody in previous centuries like the Archbishop of Canterbury to help us navigate through these really thorny, difficult topics that are maybe business lives and schooling doesn't really kit us out for, as well as kind of spiritual dimension would. And instead of providing that kind of leadership, he was off doing anything but, and as I say, clearly covering up some very unpleasant things as well.
Well, a real moment of crisis there for the Church of England. For now, James Price, former government advisor, really appreciate your thoughts on this topic. Really, really fascinating stuff. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We're going to be right back outside Lambeth Palace for reaction to the Archbishop of Canterbury's shock resignation this afternoon. But first, it's your very latest headlines.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good afternoon. It's just after 2:30. Here are your latest GB News headlines. As you've just been hearing, the Archbishop of Canterbury has resigned following a damning report into a prolific child abuser associated with the Church of England. The report concluded that Justin Welby had failed to act after learning about the abuse by John Smythe, QC, in 2013. In a statement, the Archbishop of Canterbury said the following: "Having sought the gracious permission of His Majesty the King, I have decided to resign as Archbishop of Canterbury. The Making Review has exposed the long-maintained conspiracy of silence about the heinous abuses of John Smythe. When I was informed in 2013 and told that the police had been notified, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. It is very clear that I must take personal and institutional responsibilities for the long and re-traumatising period between 2013 and 2024. We'll, of course, bring you the very latest as we get it." Now, the Prime Minister has pledged an 81% cut to UK emissions by 2035 in the UN Climate Summit in Azerbaijan. Sir Keir Starmer says there is a huge opportunity for the UK to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow, which will mean better jobs and economic growth in the UK. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say earlier on today.
Let me be clear. There is no national security. There is no economic security. There is no global security without climate security. And this is a huge opportunity for investment, for UK businesses, for British workers, if we act now to lead the world in the economy of tomorrow.
A once-a-day pill that could help tens of thousands of people give up cigarettes and prevent thousands of smoking-related deaths each year will be rolled out in the NHS. The pill works by tackling nicotine cravings and also helps with withdrawal symptoms such as irritability and trouble sleeping. Official estimates say it could help more than 85,000 people give up smoking over the next 5 years, as well as prevent up to 9,500 smoking-related deaths. And finally, Gary Lineker will step down as host of the Match of the Day at the end of the current season. The 63-year-old former England striker has presented Match of the Day since 1999, which amounts to just under 26 years in the role. Lineker was the BBC's highest paid on-air talent for 7 consecutive years. Mark Chapman, Gabby Logan and Alex Scott are the current frontrunners to replace the former England star. Well, those have been your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. More from me in half an hour's time.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another fine day for most of us with sunny spells, although there will be some stubborn fog patches slow to clear into the afternoon, and one or two spots could get a few showers, most notably the east and southeast of England with a northeasterly breeze picking up some moisture from the North Sea. Otherwise, high pressure is firmly in control of the weather, and with light winds and clear skies overnight, we have seen some fog this morning in some spots. Northern Ireland, for example, parts of central Scotland, that fog may last until the afternoon. For many other places, though, it's a dry and bright day, some patchy cloud coming into the Midlands, eastern and southeastern England, one or two showers. Otherwise, dry and feeling pleasant enough with light winds towards the north and the west and some sunshine, but temperatures are going to fall away quickly into the evening under those clear skies, and it's going to be another chilly night. And nevertheless, plenty of fine weather to end the day. That fog reforming very quickly, and in some places where it hasn't cleared, it's just going to continue into the evening across Northern Ireland and central parts of Scotland. Meanwhile, the northwest of Scotland will see a thickening of the cloud and some patchy drizzle arrive overnight, a freshening breeze as well. A weakening weather front is going to sink south into northwest Scotland. That, of course, means it's going to be a much milder night for northern and western Scotland. Northern Ireland, likewise, will see the cloud increase overnight, perhaps clearing the fog by dawn. But it's across central parts of the UK where we'll see the clearest skies and the coldest air first thing, some fog patches, a touch of frost in places. The far south and southeast, enough of a breeze, and those showers continuing means that it won't be a frosty or foggy start here. But one or two further showers are likely across parts of Kent. Meanwhile, the cloud and drizzly outbreaks of rain sink south across Scotland and Northern Ireland through the day. And it's a milder day across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it's colder further south.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Just over the Scottish side of the border, the A7 in Arkleton by the church is blocked and slow going. There's been a collision there. There's a building fire in Devizes in Wiltshire. That means Northgate Street is closed off between Castle Lane and New Park Street, causing delays. Now in Chingford in London, the North Circular by the Cooks Ferry interchange blocked in Big Hughes. A serious collision causing congestion to queue towards Waterworks Corner, back past Walthamstow, back through the 4th Street Tunnel into Edmonton onto the A10. Clockwise M25, the M3 to Staines, 12 to 13, a lane shut for a breakdown there. And the Coggeshall Road in Essex, Marks Tay, eastbound 120, Ashby Drive to junction 25, the A12 blocked and queuing, an overturned tractor there, trailer for the straw, causing queues on the approach. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. At 2:38, we're reminding you of that breaking news. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has announced his resignation from that position. The Church of England will now need to move on in selecting a successor. But of course, we're going to be live at Lambeth Palace very shortly. In the meantime, Martin Daubney will be bringing you all the latest breaking news on this story and more from 3 o'clock. Martin, thanks for joining us. First of all, your reaction. What a stunning piece of news.
Yeah, I think the news was inevitable, Tom. It was inexorable, unavoidable. The high priest of woke, the former oil baron who lectured the world on climate change, lectured us on everything from Black Lives Matter, racism, Rwanda, Brexit, vaccines, now hung by his own petard. The phrase holier than thou, surely invented for Justin Welby. The evidence was overwhelming, the scandal too deep. He had to go. What next, though, for the embattled Church of England? Its reputation lies in tatters. Can it be rebuilt? I'll also be talking with Ben Habib, the guard dog of Brexit, in the studio. Strong rumours from Brussels. There are billions of euros from the Regional Development Fund about to be pumped into the EU army. Of course, they're terrified of Donald Trump cutting off the funds to Ukraine and making them cough up 3% perhaps for NATO from their GDPs. Are they on manoeuvres, military manoeuvres, getting the European army together? Something, remember, Nick Clegg called a dangerous fantasy. It looks more and more like it could be a dangerous reality. That's all coming 3 till 6.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. Martin will be catching up with you at 3 o'clock. But for now, let's remind ourselves of that breaking news once more from the last half hour or so. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has resigned. He was under increasing pressure after a report criticised his handlings of allegations against John Smythe, who sexually abused hundreds of children in the 1970s and 1980s. We can head straight to Lambeth Palace now and speak with GB News correspondent Olivia Utley. Olivia, the Church of England is in crisis.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say the Church of England is in very hot water with the resignation of Justin Welby this morning. It feels very much as though Justin Welby was pushed rather than jumped. Just a few days ago, the Archbishop of Canterbury was saying that he had considered resigning but had decided not to, decided that he could keep his position. That argument became untenable this morning when a number of John Smythe's victims, along with 3 members of the Synod and the Archbishop of Newcastle, all said that Justin Welby's position was no longer tenable and that he should stand down. This morning, Lambeth Palace cancelled all of Welby's meetings, and it became pretty clear to those of us standing here that he would be resigning at some point today. About half an hour ago, he did just that. But yes, his resignation does leave the Church of England in a very sticky situation. He chose to resign on the basis of the fact that he just didn't take seriously enough these allegations of sexual abuse. And even when a report was published into John Smythe's behaviour back in 2013, the Archbishop of Canterbury was told, wrongly it turned out, that the matter was being investigated by the police, but he personally didn't investigate any further. He now says that he should have looked into the matter more, and that he believes that he is personally responsible for the fact that the victims of John Smythe never received justice. Smythe died in 2018 while he was still being investigated by Hampshire police. The question now is, of course, who will take up the mantle of Archbishop of Canterbury? The selection process for who becomes the next Archbishop is infamously opaque, very, very difficult to get your head around. In 2012, George Carey, who's a spokesman for the Church of England, was asked how it all works, and even he said, "I'm afraid I just don't know. It's all of secretive ballot papers. Parliament will have a bit of a say. Number 10 may be a little bit involved, although things might be quite complicated now with Keir Starmer as the Prime Minister, the first openly atheist Prime Minister that this country has ever had. There will be Conservatives, both inside Westminster and Conservative members of the clergy, small c Conservatives, who will believe that now is the turn of a Conservative to take up the mantle. Justin Welby was very, very critical of the Rwanda policy of the previous government. He put his oar in on vaccines. He's put his oar in on slavery reparations, all these hugely, hugely political issues. And Conservatives will now be saying, well, hang on, I think it's time for us to have a turn in the role. It'll be fascinating to see who gets the job. And it comes at a really difficult time for the Church of England because right now peers and people in the House of Commons are voting on whether hereditary peerages should be scrapped altogether. And at the same time, there is an amendment to that bill which would mean that bishops who have historically always sat in the House of Lords would no longer sit in the House of Lords either. So there is this very deliberate move at the moment to try and separate the church and state further, and the Archbishop of Canterbury having to resign in such unprecedented circumstances and under a really big storm cloud really doesn't help the position of the church.
I know, absolutely fascinating there. And of course, that gulf between pew and pulpit growing in terms of ideology in the last 11 years of the Archbishop's tenure. Real big questions as to whether that can be repaired, that gulf, that gap. Olivia Utley, live from Lambeth Palace. Appreciate your time and your thoughts. This, of course, is a developing story. We will have much more on this story. That, of course, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has resigned. Stay with us here on GB News.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Penelope's, which is situated in the sophisticated Hotel Armano in Covent Garden, delivers punchy dishes from the executive chef Fez Ozalgan. London-born, she's of Turkish Cypriot heritage, and at the tender age of 16, she enrolled at Catering College. So, it's lovely to see you, Fez. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
So you're now in a very prestigious position. I'm always impressed that in the world of chefing, it's possible to get to very senior positions quite young, if you're good enough. Talent is rewarded, is it not?
Definitely, yeah. It does take a lot of hard work, for sure. But, yes.
When did you know that you wanted to be a chef?
Honestly, because my parents have a cafe in Barking. And I used to go there when I was younger, in school holidays and weekends to help them. And actually, I'll be honest, I just used to really admire everyone calling my dad chef, and that's what I wanted.
And what about your food inspirations? Because I believe the food that you produce now is what? Mediterranean influenced and also to some extent Middle East influenced?
Yeah, and Spanish as well at Penelope's, yeah. So our concept at Penelope's, our CEO, Ariel, he is Israeli, but he grew up in Marbella. So, yeah.
These are the great influences.
Yeah.
What have you brought here today?
OK, so we have our sea bream tartare, which is a really good inspiration of both Spanish and Israeli. It's marinated with harissa, and it's served with a really nice gazpacho sauce, caviar on top.
I wonder whether the camera can see that. It is the most gorgeous coloured sauce on top of my sea bream tartare. That's marvellous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 minutes to 3 o'clock. Now let's get more on that resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury. We can speak to the Reverend Dr. Ian Poole, Associate Minister at St Nick's in Nottingham. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon. A shock, clearly, for the Church of England, but something that perhaps throughout the day was seeming more and more inevitable.
Yes, I think it was. As far as I'm aware, this is totally unprecedented. Somebody asked me yesterday, when was the last time an Archbishop of Canterbury left office involuntarily, and I said I think probably it was 300 or 400 years ago, and they lost their heads literally. So this is really quite extraordinary and unusual, and I think it's going to be a very challenging time over the next weeks and months and the next year. But it seemed to me that, as you say, it really was inevitable, and it was inevitable primarily because of what Justin himself had said about how leaders need to take responsibility when organisations fail. So I think he's only being judged by his own words.
And of course, he's used those words in many different contexts. He has been a controversial archbishop because of the number of political issues that he's decided to get involved in.
Yes, he has. I think it's premature for me to make any evaluation of, Justin's ministry as a whole. I've worked very closely with him on the Archbishop's Council. I think we're all very aware that he's had a very difficult time the last few years. Particularly, I think he was affected by the lockdown, the impact of that in COVID. He's been open about the fact that, he suffered from depression and had mental health issues. And, in that regard, I think we should have anything other than compassion for him as a person. But he said very clearly last week, he said that in his interview on Channel 4 News with Cathy Newman, he said, quote, "I take full responsibility." And the deputy lead bishop for safeguarding said last week, that's good, and the apology is good, but I'm not sure that words are enough. And in fact, Justin's own approach to other people in similar situations has been precisely that. Words alone are not enough. Just after he was Archbishop of Canterbury, at the time of the Jimmy Savile crisis, he specifically said about the BBC, he said, when an institution has failed so badly, the leaders need to take responsibility. So that was his own words. And then, of course, we've seen in examples of the former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, the previous Archbishop of York, John Sentamu, and the previous Bishop of Lincoln, Christopher Lowson, that under Justin's own direction, they've actually faced very severe penalties for breaches of safeguarding protocols, much less severe than the ones that Macon identified in his report last week. So the question is, inevitably for Justin, if he thinks that's how people should be dealt with, and that's the right thing to do for others, then it must surely be the right thing to do for him as well.
An inevitable decision. Reverend Dr. Ian Poole, thanks so much for your thoughts on this breaking news. Let's head back to Emily Carver now. And Emily, we've been rather interrupted. We were going to have much more fun on the farm today, but of course, this shocking news, your reaction?
Well, like you, I've been digesting this extraordinary breaking news over the last, however long it's been, 20, 30 minutes, perhaps an hour. And two things come to mind, really. If the Archbishop of Canterbury felt such a profound sense of shame, why didn't he resign sooner? Why didn't he resign sooner? Why did it take so many people to come out, so many senior members of the Church of England, political pressure too, and of course a huge amount of public pressure for him to do the right thing? And also it makes me think about all of the virtue signalling and the social justice warrioring that Justin Welby was so capable of, wasn't he? He was always talking about economic inequality. He was always talking about the injustice of the Rwanda scheme and all sorts of other political issues, social justice issues. But yet, when something like this was staring him straight in the face, he failed to act.
No, certainly. And it does seem to be a real moment of crisis now for the Church of England. I wonder, though, he is emphasising this date of 2013 about when he knew of this horrific abuse. The report itself, the independent review into the Church's handling of the Smythe case, says that Welby had some knowledge of the concerns around John Smythe as far back as 1981. I wonder how much this resignation statement from the Archbishop may well be trying to form his own version of history.
Well, that's quite shocking, hearing that he could have known about this many, many years before that 2013 date. If that's true, then there could well be massive accusations of a cover-up, failure to act being only one of the allegations against him. But I do worry about what this will do to the reputation of the Church of England as a whole, and it is so important for them to get the next Archbishop of Canterbury right.
Absolutely. That process will now be, of course, underway. Obscure though it is, as Olivia Hutley was explaining, even those running the process don't necessarily know precisely how it works. But I suppose from us, we've got to say over and out and pass on to Martin Daubney.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a fine day for most of us out there, but there is some fog remaining in places and there'll be further fog continuing overnight. Also some frost under this area of high pressure, which is keeping the weather settled at the moment, and it's a clearer area of high pressure compared with last week, and that means less low cloud, although there is still some patchy cloud, especially for East Anglia and the southeast overnight. Some showers running into Kent, along with a brisk breeze. At the other end of the country, northwest Scotland prone to thickening cloud and some drizzle overnight. That keeps it mild, but in between, a slice of clear sky and some frost and fog to wake up to first thing Wednesday. So for northwest Scotland, it's a milder start to the day with cloud and drizzle coming in from the northwest, and that's going to slowly spread its way southeastwards through the day. But it's bright enough for Aberdeenshire into the Grampians first thing. Northern Ireland, a fairly mixed bag in the morning with a lot of cloud cover, some mist and fog patches. Wales, plenty of bright weather. That's also extending into parts of the Midlands and northern England, although some fog and frost will be about first thing. Fog and frost free in the southeast, where we've got some cloud and some showers early on, but actually the showers largely disappear by the afternoon as the wind direction changes. Meanwhile, cloud spreads across much of Scotland, avoiding the east but also spilling into Northern Ireland, and it'll be a milder day in the northwest with highs of 12 or 13 Celsius. Plenty of bright weather further south though, and we end the afternoon with some sunny spells for the south and southeast after a relatively cloudy start. Nevertheless, it does turn cloudy fairly widely on Wednesday night, and into Thursday we keep that cloud cover, so a milder start to the day, but then it turns colder during Friday and Saturday from the north.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's only two. I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.